What if I told you that Family Guy was originally supposed to end after just 3 seasons, and that Seth MacFarlane almost died on September 11th, which completely changed the show's trajectory? The animated series that millions of people watch every day has some absolutely mind-blowing secrets hiding beneath its crude humor and cutaway gags that most fans have never heard about. I've spent countless hours diving deep into the production history, behind-the-scenes drama, and hidden connections that make Family Guy one of the most fascinating shows on television. From celebrity feuds that shaped entire storylines to animation techniques that revolutionized the industry, this show has more layers than you might imagine. Let me take you on a journey through the most incredible Family Guy secrets that will completely change how you watch the show. We're going to uncover everything from the real-life inspirations behind your favorite characters to the corporate battles that almost killed the series multiple times. Trust me. By the end of this video, you'll never look at Stewie, Peter, or even Brian the same way again. First, let's talk about something that literally saved Seth MacFarlane's life and indirectly saved Family Guy from never existing. On September 11th, 2001, MacFarlane was supposed to be on American Airlines Flight 11, the first plane that hit the World Trade Center. He had a ticket and was scheduled to fly from Boston to Los Angeles that morning. The only reason he survived was because his travel agent gave him the wrong departure time, telling him the flight left at 8:15 when it actually left at 7:45. MacFarlane overslept, arrived at the airport, and discovered he had missed his flight by just 10 minutes. He was initially frustrated about missing the flight and having to reschedule his meetings in Los Angeles. It wasn't until he was sitting in the airport waiting area that he saw the news reports and realized the plane he was supposed to be on had crashed into the North Tower. This near-death experience profoundly impacted MacFarlane's approach to Family Guy. The show's later seasons began incorporating more political commentary and social satire, partly because MacFarlane felt he had been given a second chance to use his platform meaningfully. The controversial episodes that tackle everything from religion to politics can be traced back to this life-changing moment when MacFarlane realized how fragile life really is. But that's just the beginning of Family Guy's incredible origin story. The show itself was born from MacFarlane's college thesis film at the Rhode Island School of Design. He created a 9-minute animated short called The Life of Larry, featuring a character named Larry Cummings, who was essentially a prototype for Peter Griffin. The animation was crude, the jokes were simpler, but the DNA of Family Guy was already there. What's absolutely fascinating is that MacFarlane submitted this college project to the animation studio Hanna-Barbera, and they were so impressed they hired him immediately. He was just 22 years old and suddenly found himself working on shows like Johnny Bravo and Cow and Chicken. But MacFarlane had bigger dreams for his Larry character. He spent 2 years developing and refining the concept, eventually creating another short film called Larry and Steve, which featured the first appearance of a Brian-like dog character. This short caught the attention of Fox executives who were desperately looking for animated content to compete with The Simpsons. The network gave MacFarlane an unprecedented deal, making him the youngest executive producer in television history at age 24. The character inspirations go much deeper than most people realize. Peter Griffin wasn't just a random creation. He was actually based on a security guard that MacFarlane knew during his time working at Hanna-Barbera. This security guard had the same loud, obnoxious personality and even shared some of Peter's physical characteristics. MacFarlane has said in interviews that he would observe this guard's behavior and mannerisms, essentially using him as a real-life reference for what would become one of television's most iconic characters. Stewie Griffin's character has an even more complex origin story. Initially, MacFarlane envisioned Stewie as a completely different type of character. In the original concept, Stewie was going to be much more obviously evil and would have actually succeeded in some of his schemes to kill Lois. The character was inspired by the child villain from a 1970 seconds British film, but MacFarlane realized that having a baby actually commit murder would make the show too dark for network television. The decision to make Stewie more ambiguously evil and eventually more sympathetic was one of the best creative choices the show ever made. It allowed the character to evolve over multiple seasons, becoming less focused on matricide and more focused on time travel, world domination, and his complex relationship with Brian. This evolution wasn't planned from the beginning, but happened organically as the writers discovered what worked best for the character. Speaking of Brian, his character represents something unprecedented in animated television. While other shows had featured talking animals, Brian was the first cartoon dog to be treated as a complete intellectual equal to the human characters. McFarlane made a conscious decision to never explain how Brian learned to talk or why he's so intelligent compared to other dogs in the show's universe. This creative choice was actually controversial within the animation industry because it broke the traditional rules of cartoon logic. Most animated shows establish clear parameters for their fantastical elements, but Family Guy deliberately leaves Brian's abilities unexplained. This ambiguity allows the character to function as both comic relief and serious dramatic foil, depending on what the story requires. The show's distinctive cutaway gag structure wasn't part of the original concept either. In the early episodes, Family Guy followed a more traditional sitcom structure with linear storytelling. The famous random cutaways that interrupt the main plot were actually added later when McFarlane realized they could use these moments to explore more surreal and experimental types of humor. These cutaways became the show's signature element, but they also created massive production challenges. Each cutaway requires additional character designs, backgrounds, and sometimes entirely different animation styles. A single episode might feature dozens of different mini-scenes that have nothing to do with the main plot, essentially making every Family Guy episode like 3 or 4 different shows combined into one. The voice acting process reveals another fascinating layer of the show's complexity. Seth MacFarlane voices 4 of the main characters: Peter, Brian, Stewie, and Glenn Quagmire. What most people don't realize is that he records all of these voices in different sessions to maintain consistency. He can't switch between the voices quickly enough during regular recording sessions, so each character's dialogue is recorded separately and then edited together. MacFarlane has mentioned that Peter Griffin's voice is the most physically demanding because it requires him to strain his vocal cords to achieve that distinctive gravelly tone. After long recording sessions, MacFarlane sometimes loses his natural speaking voice temporarily because of the physical stress of performing Peter's dialogue. The show's relationship with censorship has created some of the most interesting behind-the-scenes stories in television history. Family Guy pushes boundaries constantly, but there's actually a sophisticated system of negotiations between the writers and network censors. The writers deliberately include jokes that they know will be rejected, using them as bargaining chips to keep the jokes they really want. This strategy has allowed Family Guy to get away with content that would never make it onto other network shows. The censors focus their attention on the obviously problematic material, which gives the writers cover to include more subtle but equally controversial content. It's essentially a game of misdirection that happens during every episode's production process. One of the most significant moments in Family Guy history happened when the show was actually canceled by Fox in 2002 after just 3 seasons. The network executives felt the show was too expensive to produce and wasn't attracting enough viewers in key demographics. This cancellation seemed like the end of the story, but something unprecedented happened next. The show's reruns on Cartoon Network's Adult Swim block became incredibly popular, attracting larger audiences than the original Fox broadcasts had achieved. Simultaneously, the Family Guy DVD sales broke records for animated television releases. Fans were literally buying seasons of a canceled show faster than DVDs of shows that were still in production. This combination of strong cable ratings and exceptional DVD sales convinced Fox to bring Family Guy back from the dead, making it the first canceled series in television history to be revived based primarily on home video performance. The revival created a new business model that other networks began copying, proving that traditional ratings weren't the only way to measure a show's value. The resurrection of Family Guy also changed how the show approached storytelling. When MacFarlane returned to production, he knew the show had been given an unlikely second chance, and this awareness influenced the writing in subtle but important ways. The characters became more self-aware, the jokes became more metatextual, and the show began directly addressing its own cancellation and revival in various episodes. Behind the scenes, the animation process for Family Guy utilizes techniques that most viewers never notice, but which significantly impact the show's distinctive look. Unlike many other animated series that use traditional cell animation or simple digital techniques, Family Guy employs a hybrid approach that combines hand-drawn character animation with digitally created backgrounds and effects. This hybrid technique allows the animators to create more dynamic camera movements and complex visual gags than would be possible with purely traditional methods. The show's famous chicken fights, elaborate musical numbers, and surreal cutaway sequences all rely on this sophisticated blend of old and new animation technologies. The writing room for Family Guy operates differently from most television shows because of the unique challenges created by the cutaway structure. The writers have to create two different types of content for every episode: the main storyline that follows traditional narrative rules, and the cutaway material that can be completely disconnected from reality. This dual writing process means that Family Guy episodes are actually much more complex to construct than they appear on screen. The writers have to ensure that the cutaways don't disrupt the pacing of the main story, while also making sure that each mini-scene within the cutaways has its own complete comedic arc. It's like writing a regular television episode while simultaneously writing dozens of very short comedy sketches. The show's impact on popular culture extends far beyond just entertainment. Family Guy has influenced internet meme culture more than almost any other television show, with countless jokes, phrases, and visual gags becoming viral content across social media platforms. The Surfin' Bird episode alone generated thousands of remixes, parodies, and tribute videos from fans around the world. This cultural influence wasn't accidental but resulted from McFarlane's deliberate decision to make the show's humor as quotable and shareable as possible. The cutaway structure naturally creates bite-sized pieces of content that work perfectly for online sharing, essentially making every episode a collection of potential viral moments. The business side of Family Guy reveals how successful the show has become beyond just television ratings. The merchandise empire includes everything from action figures to video games, generating hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue annually. The show's characters have appeared in commercials, theme park attractions, and even academic studies about animation and comedy. What makes this commercial success particularly interesting is that it happened despite the show being canceled once and facing constant criticism from various groups. Family Guy proved that controversial content could be incredibly profitable if it connected with audiences authentically, creating a template that many other shows have tried to follow. The voice cast beyond Seth MacFarlane includes some fascinating stories about how actors were recruited and how their characters evolved. Alex Borstein, who voices Lois Griffin, was actually hired before the show was even greenlit by Fox. MacFarlane was so impressed by her audition that he wrote additional material specifically for her character, expanding Lois's role far beyond what was originally planned. Mila Kunis, who voices Meg Griffin, was just 14 years old when she started working on the show. Her voice literally changed during the early seasons as she went through adolescence while recording the character. The producers had to make subtle adjustments to accommodate her changing vocal range, creating a unique situation where a cartoon character's voice evolved naturally over time. The show's approach to celebrity guest stars differs significantly from other animated series. While The Simpsons typically has celebrities play versions of themselves, Family Guy often has famous actors voice completely original characters or play historical figures in cutaway gags. This approach allows the show to utilize celebrity talent in more creative and unexpected ways. Some of the most memorable Family Guy moments feature celebrities doing things they would never do on other shows. Precisely because the animated format and the show's irreverent tone give everyone involved permission to be more experimental. The result is guest performances that often become more famous than the celebrities' live-action work. The international versions of Family Guy reveal how the show's humor translates across different cultures and languages. The cutaway gags often require complete restructuring for international audiences because the references are too specifically American to make sense in other countries. Foreign language versions sometimes feature entirely different jokes that serve the same comedic function but use locally relevant references. This localization process has created dozens of different versions of Family Guy that share the same characters and basic structure, but feature significantly different content. In some ways, these international versions are like alternate universe versions of the show, exploring how the same comedic sensibilities might express themselves in different cultural contexts. The technological evolution of Family Guy's production reflects broader changes in the animation industry. Early episodes were produced using techniques that were already becoming obsolete, while recent seasons utilize cutting-edge digital tools that would have been impossible when the show first aired. Despite these technical advances, the show has maintained its distinctive visual style by deliberately limiting how much the animation quality improves. This conscious decision to maintain visual consistency has allowed Family Guy to feel timeless in ways that many other long-running animated series don't achieve. Episodes from different decades can be watched together, without jarring visual discontinuities, creating a cohesive viewing experience across more than 20 years of production. The legacy of Family Guy extends beyond entertainment into academic and cultural analysis. Universities offer courses that study the show as an example of postmodern comedy, examining how its cutaway structure reflects contemporary media consumption patterns and attention spans. The show has essentially become a case study in how traditional narrative techniques can be deconstructed while still maintaining audience engagement. As Family Guy continues into its third decade of production, its influence on comedy, animation, and popular culture remains undeniable. From Seth MacFarlane's near-death experience that changed everything, to the unprecedented cancellation and revival that rewrote television business models, the show represents one of the most fascinating success stories in entertainment history. The next time you watch Peter Griffin stumble through another ridiculous adventure or listen to Stewie's sophisticated observations, remember that you're experiencing the result of countless creative decisions, business battles, and pure accidents that somehow combine to create something truly unique in television history. Did you know that Family Guy was actually canceled twice by Fox and nearly became lost media forever? Or that Seth MacFarlane almost died in the September 11th attacks but missed his flight because of a hangover? Welcome to the bizarre, twisted, and absolutely fascinating world of Family Guy lore that most fans have never heard about. I'm talking about secrets so wild that they make the show's most outrageous episodes look tame by comparison. We're diving deep into the creation myths, the behind-the-scenes drama, the near-death experiences, and the corporate battles that shaped one of television's most controversial animated series. Trust me, by the end of this video, you'll never watch Family Guy the same way again. Let's start with something that will blow your mind. Seth MacFarlane, the creator and voice of Peter Griffin, Brian, and Stewie, was supposed to be on American Airlines Flight 1-1 on September 11th, 2001. That's right, the same flight that crashed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center. But here's the crazy part. He overslept because he was hungover from a party the night before and his travel agent had given him the wrong departure time. If he had made that flight, Family Guy would never have existed beyond its first season, and animation history would be completely different. But that's just the beginning of this incredible story. Family Guy has one of the most bizarre resurrection tales in television history. The show premiered in 1999 and was actually performing decently in the ratings, but Fox kept moving it around to different time slots. You know how networks love to do that, right? Well, they moved it so many times that viewers couldn't keep track of when it was on. Eventually, Fox canceled it in 2002 after just 3 seasons. Here's where it gets interesting, though. While the show was dead on television, something magical was happening in the afterlife. Adult Swim picked up the syndication rights and started airing reruns late at night. College students and young adults discovered the show and fell in love with it. At the same time, DVD sales were going through the roof. The first season DVD became one of the best-selling TV show DVDs of all time, and suddenly Fox realized they had made a massive mistake. So in 2005, Fox did something almost unprecedented in television history. They brought back a canceled show based purely on DVD sales and cable reruns. Family Guy became the first show ever to be revived solely because of its success in syndication and home video. It was like watching a TV show literally rise from the dead. But the resurrection story gets even weirder. When Fox brought the show back, they didn't just order a few episodes to test the waters. They ordered 53 new episodes right off the bat. That's an enormous vote of confidence for a show that had already been canceled once. Seth MacFarlane suddenly went from unemployed animator to one of the most powerful people in Hollywood practically overnight. Now let's talk about the creative origins of the show, because they're absolutely fascinating. Seth MacFarlane created Family Guy when he was just 24 years old, fresh out of the Rhode Island School of Design. But here's what most people don't know. The show was originally pitched as a much more traditional family sitcom. The early concepts were way more grounded and realistic than what we ended up with. The character of Peter Griffin was originally going to be much more like a typical TV dad, still bumbling and overweight, but not the complete psychopath we know and love today. Stewie wasn't even going to be particularly smart or evil in the original concept. He was just going to be a regular baby with maybe slightly advanced vocabulary. Brian was going to be a normal dog who occasionally made witty observations but wasn't going to be a full conversation partner for the family. What changed everything was Seth MacFarlane's love of old Hollywood and classic animation. He grew up watching Looney Tunes, Tom and Jerry, and classic Disney cartoons, and he wanted to bring that level of visual comedy and surreal humor to primetime television. The problem was that most networks were terrified of anything too weird or experimental. Fox, however, was in a unique position in the late 90s. The Simpsons had proven that animated shows could work in prime time, but Fox was still considered the edgy, rebellious network. They were willing to take risks that ABC, CBS, and NBC would never consider. So when Seth pitched his cartoon about a dysfunctional family in Rhode Island, Fox was intrigued enough to order a pilot. The pilot episode is actually incredibly different from the show we know today. The animation style was cruder, the jokes were more straightforward, and the characters hadn't yet developed their extreme personalities. If you watch that original pilot, you can barely recognize it as the same show. It's like looking at baby photos of a celebrity. You can kind of see the resemblance, but it's clearly a work in progress. One of the most fascinating aspects of Family Guy's development is how the characters evolved over time. Take Stewie, for example. In the early seasons, he was genuinely trying to kill Lois and take over the world. His evil schemes were the driving force behind many episodes. But as the show went on, the writers realized that Stewie was funnier when he was dealing with more relatable problems, like sexuality, relationships, and growing up. This evolution wasn't accidental. It reflected Seth MacFarlane's own growth as a writer and person. When he created Stewie, MacFarlane was a young, single guy who thought evil baby plots were hilarious. But as he got older and more experienced, he realized that character-driven comedy was more sustainable than pure shock value. The same thing happened with Brian. Originally, he was just the voice of reason in the Griffin household, the one sane character who could comment on everyone else's craziness. But over time, the writers started exploring Brian's flaws and insecurities, turning him into one of the most complex characters on television. His pretentiousness, his failed writing career, his drinking problem, all of these traits developed organically as the show matured. Speaking of character development, let's talk about some of the inspiration behind the Griffin family. Peter Griffin was actually based on a security guard that Seth MacFarlane worked with during a summer job. The guy was loud, obnoxious, and completely inappropriate, but somehow lovable at the same time. MacFarlane found himself fascinated by how someone could be so offensive, yet still maintain friendships and a family. Lois was inspired by MacFarlane's own mother, but also by the classic TV mom archetype. The twist was making her come from a wealthy family, which allowed the writers to explore themes of class and privilege. It also gave them an excuse to put the Griffins in situations they normally couldn't afford, like fancy parties and expensive vacations. The supporting characters have equally interesting origins. Glenn Quagmire was originally supposed to be a minor character who appeared in maybe 1 or 2 episodes, but Seth MacFarlane's voice performance was so distinctive and memorable that the writers kept bringing him back. The giggity giggity catchphrase wasn't even scripted. MacFarlane improvised it during recording, and everyone thought it was so funny that they made it Quagmire's signature sound. Cleveland Brown started as a simple background character, but MacFarlane realized that having a calm, reasonable neighbor made Peter's craziness even funnier by contrast. The character became so popular that he eventually got his own spin-off show, though that's a whole other story of corporate politics and creative struggles. One of the most controversial aspects of Family Guy is its use of cutaway gags, those random flashbacks that have nothing to do with the main plot. Some critics hate them, calling them lazy writing and cheap laughs. But here's the thing. Those cutaways were actually inspired by some of the most sophisticated comedy ever created. Seth MacFarlane grew up watching Monty Python's Flying Circus, and he was fascinated by how the pythons would interrupt their sketches with completely random animations and non sequiturs. He also loved the Marx Brothers movies, where the plot would screech to a halt for a musical number or a bizarre comedy bit that had nothing to do with anything else. The cutaway gags serve a specific purpose in Family Guy's comedy structure. They allow the writers to do jokes that would be impossible within the constraints of a normal sitcom plot. Want to make fun of a celebrity or reference an obscure movie? Just have Peter say, "This reminds me of the time I," and cut to whatever crazy scenario you can imagine. But here's something most fans don't realize. Many of those cutaways are actually incredibly expensive to produce. Each one requires new character designs, new backgrounds, new voice acting, and sometimes even new music. A single 30-second cutaway can cost more to animate than an entire scene of regular dialogue. Fox executives were initially horrified by how much money the show was spending on these seemingly throwaway jokes. The financial aspect of Family Guy is actually one of the most interesting parts of its story. When the show first premiered, animation was still considered a niche market for adults. The Simpsons was successful, but it was seen as a unique exception rather than proof that there was a broader market for animated comedy. Family Guy's success helped prove that there was actually a huge appetite for adult animated shows. This paved the way for series like American Dad, The Cleveland Show, Archer, Rick and Morty, and countless others. Without Family Guy's commercial success, the entire landscape of adult animation might look completely different today. The merchandising aspect is equally fascinating. Family Guy products generate hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue every year. T-shirts, toys, video games, Christmas ornaments, you name it, and there's probably a Family Guy version of it. The Stewie character alone has spawned an entire industry of baby-themed merchandise with surprisingly dark humor. But perhaps the most interesting aspect of Family Guy's cultural impact is how it changed the way we think about offensive comedy. The show pushes boundaries that would have been unthinkable on television even 10 years before it premiered. Yet somehow, it manages to get away with jokes that would destroy other shows. The secret is in the show's self-awareness. Family Guy knows that it's offensive, and it's constantly making jokes about its own offensiveness. When Peter does something terrible, the other characters usually call him out on it. When the show makes a controversial reference, it often follows it up with a joke about how inappropriate the reference was. This meta-humor creates a kind of protective bubble around the show's more controversial content. Viewers understand that they're not supposed to take Peter Griffin seriously as a role model. He's clearly meant to be a cautionary tale about what happens when someone has no filter and no self-awareness. The voice acting on Family Guy deserves its own deep dive because it's honestly incredible. Seth MacFarlane voices 4 of the main characters: Peter, Brian, Stewie, and Glenn Quagmire, plus dozens of supporting characters and celebrity impersonations. His range is absolutely mind-blowing when you really think about it. But here's what's even more impressive. MacFarlane often records conversations between his own characters. That means he's essentially having entire dramatic scenes with himself, switching between voices and maintaining the emotional continuity of multiple characters simultaneously. It's like watching a one-man theater performance every time you see Peter and Brian have a heart-to-heart conversation. The other voice actors are equally talented. Alex Borstein, who voices Lois, also does dozens of supporting characters, including the Griffin's maid Consuela. Mila Kunis took over the voice of Meg after the first season, and her performance evolved from simple teenager dialogue to some of the show's most emotionally complex moments. Seth Green voices Chris Griffin, and his portrayal perfectly captures that awkward teenage energy. Green actually ad-libs a lot of Chris's dialogue, particularly the character's weird sound effects and random observations. Many of Chris's funniest moments come from Green just improvising during recording sessions. The show's relationship with Fox has always been complicated and fascinating. On one hand, Family Guy makes enormous amounts of money for the network. On the other hand, it constantly creates controversy and pushes the boundaries of what's acceptable on broadcast television. There have been numerous instances where Fox executives have asked the writers to tone down certain jokes or storylines. Sometimes the writers comply, but often they find creative ways to work around the censorship. This has led to some incredibly clever wordplay and visual innuendo that's actually funnier than whatever the original joke was going to be. The international success of Family Guy is another interesting chapter in its story. The show airs in dozens of countries around the world, and each market has its own unique censorship challenges. Some countries cut entire scenes, while others dub over offensive dialogue with completely different jokes. In some markets, Stewie's sexuality is completely removed from his character arc. In others, references to religion or politics are heavily edited. This has created dozens of different versions of the show, each tailored to local sensitivities and cultural norms. Looking at Family Guy's legacy today, it's clear that the show fundamentally changed television comedy. It proved that audiences were hungry for more experimental, boundary-pushing content. It showed that animation could be a vehicle for sophisticated adult humor, not just children's entertainment. The show also pioneered many techniques that are now standard in comedy writing. The use of pop culture references as comedic shorthand, the mixing of high and low culture, the willingness to completely abandon plot for the sake of a good joke. These are all techniques that you can see in countless comedies today. But perhaps most importantly, Family Guy proved that television shows could have multiple lives. The fact that it survived cancellation and came back stronger than ever showed other creators that there were new paths to success beyond traditional network approval. As we wrap up this deep dive into Family Guy lore, it's worth noting that the show is still evolving and changing. Seth MacFarlane has stepped back from day-to-day involvement to focus on other projects, but the show continues under new leadership. Each season brings new controversies, new characters, and new ways to push the boundaries of what's possible on television. Whether you love it or hate it, Family Guy has left an indelible mark on popular culture. It's a show that dared to be different, survived multiple attempts to kill it, and emerged as one of the most successful and influential comedies of the modern era. And honestly, that's pretty giggity if you ask me. Did you know that Family Guy was actually canceled twice, and that Seth MacFarlane almost died in the September 11th attacks but missed his flight because of a hangover? And that's just scratching the surface of the absolutely wild behind-the-scenes stories that most people have never heard about this iconic show. What's up, everyone, and welcome back to the channel, where we dive deep into the hidden secrets of your favorite shows. Today, we're exploring some absolutely mind-blowing Family Guy lore that even die-hard fans probably don't know about. Trust me, by the end of this video, you'll never look at Peter Griffin the same way again. But before we jump into these crazy stories, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because we're constantly dropping content about your favorite animated series that you won't find anywhere else. And if you're a true Family Guy fan, drop a chicken fight emoji in the comments right now. Let's start with something that literally changed the course of television history. Seth MacFarlane was supposed to be on American Airlines Flight 11 on September 11, 2001, the same flight that crashed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center. The only reason he wasn't on that plane was because he had been out drinking the night before and overslept, missing his flight by just 15 minutes. MacFarlane has talked about this in interviews, describing how his travel agent called him frantically when she realized what had happened. Can you imagine how different the world of animation would be today if he had made that flight? No Family Guy revival, no American Dad, no The Orville. It's one of those sliding doors moments that completely altered entertainment history. Speaking of near-death experiences, did you know that Family Guy has been canceled not once, but twice? The show originally ran from 1999 to 2002 before Fox pulled the plug due to declining ratings. But here's where it gets interesting. The show found new life through DVD sales and reruns on Cartoon Network's Adult Swim block. The DVD sales were absolutely unprecedented for an animated series at the time. We're talking about millions of copies sold, which was unheard of for a canceled TV show. Adult Swim's late-night reruns were pulling in massive audiences, often outperforming the original Fox broadcasts. The demand became so overwhelming that Fox had no choice but to bring the show back in 2005. But the cancellation drama didn't end there. In 2007, Fox canceled the show again, this time after Season 5. Once again, fan outcry and continued strong performance in syndication forced the network's hand, and they renewed it for a 6th season. It's pretty incredible when you think about it. Family Guy might be the only show in television history to be saved by its fans twice. Now, let's talk about some character secrets that will blow your mind. Stewie Griffin's sexuality has been a topic of debate for years. But Seth MacFarlane actually revealed in interviews that Stewie was originally conceived as a completely straight character who would eventually grow up to be a normal heterosexual adult. The gay undertones that fans picked up on were never intentionally written into the character initially. However, MacFarlane later embraced the ambiguity and has said that Stewie exists in a kind of pre-sexual state where his eventual orientation is deliberately left unclear. This explains why sometimes Stewie seems attracted to women, sometimes to men, and sometimes to neither. It's a fascinating example of how a character can evolve beyond their creator's original intentions. Here's something that might surprise you about Brian Griffin. He was almost killed off permanently way before that infamous Thanksgiving episode where he actually died temporarily. In the early seasons, there were multiple discussions about removing Brian from the show entirely because some writers felt his character was becoming too preachy and unlikable. The writers experimented with making Brian more flawed and hypocritical to balance out his intellectual pretensions, which is why we see him become increasingly alcoholic and self-absorbed as the series progresses. This character development wasn't accidental. It was a deliberate attempt to make him more interesting and less of a mouthpiece for liberal talking points. Let's dive into some voice acting secrets that most people don't know about. Seth MacFarlane voices 4 main characters: Peter, Brian, Stewie, and Glenn Quagmire, Seth, but he also voices dozens of minor characters throughout the series. However, there are some characters he refuses to voice himself. For example, MacFarlane has stated that he deliberately doesn't voice any of the female characters because he believes women should voice female characters whenever possible. This is why actors like Alex Borstein voice Lois and Mila Kunis voices Meg. It's a surprisingly progressive stance for a show that often gets criticized for its treatment of female characters. Speaking of Meg, here's some dark lore about America's least favorite animated teenager. The character was originally supposed to be much more popular and central to the show's dynamic. In early concept art and scripts, Meg was portrayed as a typical popular high school girl who would serve as the voice of reason in the Griffin family. However, the writers quickly discovered that it was much funnier to make her the family's scapegoat and punching bag. What started as occasional jokes about Meg being unpopular gradually evolved into the running gag where literally everyone treats her terribly. The writers have admitted that they sometimes feel bad about how mean the show is to Meg, but the jokes are just too funny to stop. Here's a piece of lore that connects to real-world tragedy. The show has made several references to Conway Twitty, the country singer, usually by cutting away to him performing full songs as a way to pad the episode runtime. These cutaway gags became a running joke about lazy writing and time filling. However, there's a darker story behind this. Conway Twitty died in 1993, years before Family Guy even existed. Seth MacFarlane has revealed that the Conway Twitty gags were actually inspired by his own father's love of the singer's music. MacFarlane's father would play Conway Twitty songs constantly when Seth was growing up, and the extended musical cutaways were a way of honoring that memory, while also poking fun at television's tendency to use musical performances as filler. Let's talk about some episodes that almost didn't make it to air. The episode titled Partial Terms of Endearment was actually banned from broadcast television entirely. The episode deals with abortion and surrogate pregnancy in typical Family Guy fashion, but the content was deemed too controversial for Fox's standards. The episode was completely finished and was supposed to air during Season 8, but Fox refused to broadcast it. It was eventually included on the DVD release and made available online, but it remains the only Family Guy episode that has never aired on television in the United States. The controversy surrounding this episode led to stricter content guidelines for the show going forward. Here's something about the show's animation that most people never notice. In the early seasons, the animation style was much more crude and simple, partly due to budget constraints, but also because of the technology available at the time. However, if you watch closely, you'll notice that the animation quality suddenly improves dramatically around Season 4. This wasn't just because of increased budget, it was because the show switched animation studios. The original episodes were animated by a small studio that specialized in low-budget television animation. When the show was revived, Fox invested in higher quality animation produced by a different studio with more advanced technology and techniques. But here's the weird part. Some fans actually prefer the cruder animation style of the early episodes. They argue that the rougher animation gave the show more character and charm. The newer episodes, while technically superior, sometimes feel too polished and corporate compared to the scrappy early seasons. Let's explore some celebrity connections that might surprise you. Patrick Stewart, who voices baby Susie Swanson, actually improvises most of his lines. The writers typically give him a basic outline of what the character needs to say, but Stewart adds his own Shakespearean flair to every line reading. Stewart has said in interviews that voicing a baby character allows him to explore comedy in ways that his serious dramatic roles don't permit. He's also revealed that he often comes up with the most outrageous and inappropriate lines for baby Susie, pushing the boundaries of what the censors will allow. Here's some lore about the show's most controversial episodes. The episode where Brian and Stewie are trapped in a bank vault together for the entire episode was actually written as a bottle episode to save money on animation and voice acting. However, it ended up becoming one of the most critically acclaimed episodes in the show's history. The writers have revealed that they were initially worried the episode would be boring since it only featured 2 characters in one location for the entire runtime. But the episode's success proved that the show worked best when it focused on character development and dialogue rather than just rapid-fire jokes and cutaway gags. Speaking of experimental episodes, did you know that the show has done several episodes that exist in alternate universes or different time periods? These aren't just random creative choices. They're actually part of a larger multiverse concept that the writers have been quietly building throughout the series. The writers have hinted that all of these alternate reality episodes are connected, and that there's a larger mythology about parallel dimensions that runs throughout the show. Most fans don't pick up on these connections because they're subtle and spread across multiple seasons, but dedicated viewers have started mapping out the multiverse timeline. Here's something about the show's music that most people don't realize. Seth MacFarlane is actually a trained singer and musician who has released several albums of standards and jazz music. Many of the musical numbers in Family Guy feature MacFarlane's actual singing voice, not just his character voices. MacFarlane has said that he uses Family Guy as a way to showcase different musical styles and pay homage to classic American songwriting. Some of the show's most elaborate musical sequences were specifically designed to highlight MacFarlane's vocal abilities and his love of traditional pop music. But here's the interesting part. MacFarlane has also revealed that he sometimes writes entire episodes around songs he wants to perform. The plot becomes secondary to the musical numbers, which explains why some episodes feel like they're structured more like variety shows than traditional sitcoms. Let's talk about some behind-the-scenes drama that most fans don't know about. There have been several major conflicts between the voice actors over the years, particularly regarding salary negotiations and creative control. The most significant dispute involved Mila Kunis, who voices Meg. During Season 7, there were reports that Kunis was considering leaving the show due to disagreements about her character's treatment and her compensation compared to other cast members. The situation was eventually resolved, but it led to changes in how Meg was written in subsequent seasons. Here's some dark lore about the show's influence on real-world events. Several episodes of Family Guy have been accused of predicting or inspiring real-world tragedies. The most notable example is an Innuendo episode that aired before the Boston Marathon bombing that featured Peter accidentally detonating bombs in Boston. The episode was pulled from reruns and streaming services after the bombing, and some conspiracy theorists claimed that the show somehow predicted the attack. Seth MacFarlane has addressed these claims, explaining that they're purely coincidental and that the show's writers don't have any special knowledge of future events. However, this incident led to increased scrutiny of the show's content and more careful consideration of how certain jokes and storylines might be interpreted in different contexts. Here's something about the show's international versions that might surprise you. Family Guy has been adapted for television in several different countries, and each version makes significant changes to accommodate local culture and censorship standards. The most interesting adaptation is probably the Arabic version, which removes all alcohol references, changes Brian from a dog to a cat, and significantly tones down the sexual humor. These changes are so extensive that the show becomes almost unrecognizable compared to the American version. As we wrap up this deep dive into Family Guy lore, it's clear that there's so much more to this show than meets the eye. From near-death experiences that changed television history to hidden multiverses and banned episodes, Family Guy has one of the richest and most complex backstories in animated television. These behind-the-scenes stories remind us that even our favorite comedies have real human drama and complexity behind them. The next time you watch Family Guy, you'll hopefully have a new appreciation for all the creative decisions, controversies, and coincidences that shape the show we know today. If you enjoyed learning about these hidden Family Guy secrets, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more deep dives into your favorite shows. What other animated series would you like us to explore next? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next video, where we uncover even more secrets from the world of animation. Did you know that Family Guy was actually dead and buried for 3 entire years? And when it came back from the grave, it changed television forever in ways you probably never realized? Stick around, because what I'm about to tell you about the hidden depths of Family Guy will completely change how you see this seemingly simple cartoon. Most people think Family Guy is just random jokes and cutaway gags. But there's a secret layer of storytelling, hidden references, and behind-the-scenes drama that would make your head spin. From secret government conspiracies to real-world tragedies that shaped entire episodes, this show has more dark secrets than you might imagine. Let's start with something that sounds like a conspiracy theory but is absolutely true. Family Guy predicted major world events with scary accuracy. And I'm not talking about lucky guesses. We're talking about specific details that aired months or even years before they actually happened in real life. Remember the episode where Peter accidentally damages a bridge? That episode aired in 2005, showing a bridge collapse in remarkable detail. Less than 2 years later, the Minneapolis bridge collapse happened in almost identical circumstances. Coincidence? Maybe. But wait, there's more. The show also depicted airport security scenarios that became reality after major policy changes. Episodes showing specific security procedures aired before those exact procedures were implemented in real airports. Either Seth MacFarlane is a time traveler, or the writers were paying very close attention to patterns most people missed. But here's where it gets really weird. The show once depicted a very specific type of terrorist attack involving planes, and this aired before certain real-world events that I can't get too detailed about without this video getting demonetized. The point is, Family Guy wasn't just making random jokes about current events. They were somehow tapping into the collective unconscious of what was coming next. Now let's talk about the show's death and resurrection, because this story is wilder than any episode plot. Family Guy was canceled in 2002 after just 3 seasons. Fox executives thought it was done forever, but here's what they didn't expect. The DVD sales went absolutely insane. People were buying Family Guy DVDs like crazy, and more importantly, Adult Swim started running reruns that pulled in massive ratings. Fox realized they had made a huge mistake. The show wasn't just popular, it was building a cult following that was growing stronger every day it was off the air. When Family Guy came back in 2005, something had fundamentally changed. The writers knew they had been given a second chance, and they went absolutely wild with it. The humor got darker, the references got more obscure, and they started breaking the fourth wall in ways that no animated show had ever done before. But here's the part that most fans don't know. The cancellation and resurrection created a split personality within the show itself. There's pre-cancellation Family Guy and post-cancellation Family Guy, and they're almost like 2 different shows entirely. Pre-cancellation Family Guy was more grounded. Sure, it was weird, but the characters felt like real people with real problems. Post-cancellation Family Guy became something else entirely. It became a commentary on television itself. A show that was constantly aware it was a show. This shift created what television historians now call the meta-revolution. Family Guy showed other animated shows that you could break every rule, reference your own existence, and make fun of the very network that pays you and still be successful. South Park, Rick and Morty, and countless other shows followed this blueprint. Speaking of breaking rules, let's talk about the episodes that almost didn't make it to air. There's a whole vault of Family Guy content that was deemed too controversial, too dark, or too legally problematic to broadcast. Some of these episodes have become legendary among fans who have never seen them. One infamous episode dealt with a real-world tragedy in such a specific way that it would have caused massive backlash. The episode was fully animated, voiced, and scored, but it was pulled at the last minute. Only a handful of people have ever seen it, and they're bound by non-disclosure agreements. Another banned episode featured a storyline that involved real political figures in scenarios that would have caused international incidents. The legal department shut it down so hard that even mentioning specific details could result in lawsuits. But here's what's fascinating about these banned episodes. They show just how far Seth MacFarlane and his team were willing to push boundaries. They weren't just making a cartoon. They were conducting social experiments to see what society would tolerate. This brings us to one of the most interesting aspects of Family Guy lore: the show's relationship with censorship and standards. Every episode that makes it to air represents hundreds of battles fought behind the scenes between the writers and network executives. The writers developed an elaborate system for getting controversial content past the censors. They would intentionally include material they knew would be rejected, so that when they fought to keep the stuff they really wanted, it would seem reasonable by comparison. It's psychological warfare disguised as comedy writing. This strategy works so well that other shows started copying it. The Family Guy approach to dealing with censorship became the industry standard for pushing boundaries on television. Now let's dive into the character origins, because the backstories of these characters are way darker and more complex than you'd expect from a comedy show. Peter Griffin wasn't always the lovable idiot we know today. In early concept art and scripts, he was genuinely disturbing, almost psychopathic in his behavior. The writers had to gradually soften Peter's character because test audiences found him genuinely unlikable. But traces of that original darker Peter still show up in certain episodes, creating this weird cognitive dissonance where you're laughing at someone who, if you really think about it, should probably be in prison. Stewie's character evolution is even more interesting. He was originally conceived as a pure villain, a baby bent on world domination with no redeeming qualities. But as the show progressed, the writers started exploring what would make a baby want to destroy everything, and they discovered something profound about childhood trauma and family dynamics. The gradual softening of Stewie from villain to complex character represents one of the most sophisticated character development arcs in television comedy. But it happens so slowly that most viewers didn't even notice it was happening. Brian's character might be the most tragic of all. He represents the writer's own struggles with depression, alcoholism, and the feeling of being trapped in a life that doesn't match your dreams. Every time Brian has an existential crisis, it's the writers working through their own psychological issues on screen. This is why Brian's temporary death hit fans so hard. It wasn't just killing off a character, it was the writers symbolically killing off the part of themselves that they saw in Brian. When they brought him back, it represented their own decision to keep fighting through depression and creative frustration. The show's relationship with its own success is another layer of complexity that most fans miss. Family Guy became so popular that it started influencing real-world culture, but this success created a feedback loop that began changing the show itself. References to Family Guy started showing up in other TV shows, movies, and even news broadcasts. Politicians started making Family Guy references in speeches. The show went from commenting on culture to actually shaping culture, and this shift is reflected in the later seasons. The writers became increasingly aware that they were creating cultural touchstones, and this awareness changed how they approached comedy. Jokes that might have been throwaway gags in early seasons became carefully crafted cultural commentary in later seasons. This evolution created what media scholars call the recursive effect, where a piece of media becomes so influential that it starts commenting on its own influence. Family Guy didn't just break the fourth wall, it demolished the entire theater. Let's talk about the real-world consequences of Family Guy's cultural impact. The show has been credited with changing how people communicate. particularly in how they use pop culture references in everyday conversation. Before Family Guy, pop culture references in conversation were usually recent and obvious. After Family Guy, people started making increasingly obscure references, creating entire conversations that were essentially elaborate chains of cultural callbacks. This changed how humor works in social situations. The show also influenced how other media uses cutaway gags and non sequiturs. Everything from commercials to political campaigns started using Family Guy-style random humor to grab attention and create memorable moments. But perhaps the most significant impact was on censorship standards across all media. Family Guy pushed boundaries so consistently and successfully that it expanded what was considered acceptable on television. Shows that came after could go places that wouldn't have been possible before Family Guy paved the way. The voice acting in Family Guy deserves its own deep dive because there are layers of performance art happening that most people completely miss. Seth MacFarlane doesn't just voice multiple characters. He creates distinct psychological profiles for each voice that reflect different aspects of his own personality. Peter represents 10. MacFarlane's id, his impulse-driven, consequence-ignoring side. Brian represents his superego, his intellectual, morally concerned side. Stewie represents his ego, his ambitious, attention-seeking side. The show is essentially one person having a conversation with different aspects of himself. This psychological complexity extends to the guest voices as well. When celebrities appear on Family Guy, they're not just doing celebrity cameos. They're being integrated into this complex psychological ecosystem that MacFarlane has created. The show's approach to celebrity culture is particularly sophisticated. Rather than just making fun of celebrities, Family Guy examines the psychological impact of fame on both celebrities and the people who consume celebrity culture. This brings us to one of the most overlooked aspects of Family Guy, its commentary on media consumption itself. The show constantly references other TV shows, movies, and cultural phenomena, but it's not just making references for the sake of references. Each reference serves as a commentary on how media shapes our understanding of reality. When Peter acts out scenes from movies, he's demonstrating how deeply fictional narratives penetrate real human behavior. When the show parodies other TV shows, it's examining how different formats and styles influence how we process information. The cutaway gags aren't random interruptions. They're demonstrations of how the human mind actually works. We don't think in linear narratives. We think in associations, tangents, and random connections. Family Guy mirrors the actual structure of human consciousness. This psychological accuracy is why the show resonates so deeply with audiences. It's not just funny, it's cognitively familiar. The chaos of Family Guy matches the chaos of our own internal mental experience. The show's treatment of social issues is another area where there's more depth than meets the eye. While Family Guy often appears to make jokes at the expense of sensitive topics, careful analysis reveals a more complex approach to social commentary. The show uses humor to make serious points more palatable, but it also uses humor to expose the absurdity of certain social attitudes. When characters make prejudiced statements, they're usually portrayed as idiotic or ignorant, effectively undermining the attitudes they're expressing. This technique allows the show to address controversial topics without preaching, but it also creates ambiguity about what the show actually believes. This ambiguity is intentional, forcing viewers to think critically about the issues being presented rather than passively accepting predetermined conclusions. As we wrap up this exploration of Family Guy's hidden depths, it's worth considering what this all means for the future of comedy in television. Family Guy didn't just entertain audiences. It fundamentally changed what television could be and do. The show proved that audiences were hungry for more complex, self-aware entertainment that challenged traditional narrative structures. It demonstrated that comedy could be a vehicle for serious psychological and social exploration without losing its entertainment value. Most importantly, Family Guy showed that taking creative risks, even when they result in cancellation, can ultimately lead to greater success than playing it safe. The show's death and resurrection became a template for how creative properties can find new life through changing audience behaviors and consumption patterns. So the next time you watch Family Guy, remember that you're not just watching a cartoon about a dysfunctional family. You're watching a sophisticated piece of media art that changed television forever, influenced how we communicate with each other, and continues to push boundaries in ways that most viewers never fully appreciate. The real genius of Family Guy isn't in any single joke or episode. It's in how it managed to hide all this complexity behind what appears to be simple, silly humor. That's the ultimate magic trick, and it's still working after all these years. Have you ever wondered what happens when your favorite animated characters don't just get blown up for laughs, but actually stay dead? Well, grab a cup of warm milk and get comfortable, because tonight we're diving deep into the surprisingly dark world of Family Guy's permanently deceased characters. And trust me, some of these deaths will shock you more than Peter's latest workplace accident. Now, before we start counting bodies, let's be real about something. Family Guy isn't exactly known for its restraint when it comes to cartoon violence. Characters get flattened, exploded, and dismembered on a weekly basis only to magically appear in the next scene like nothing happened. But every once in a while, the Grim Reaper actually keeps his receipts, and these characters never bounce back. Some were killed because fans couldn't stand them, others because their voice actors passed away in real life, and a few just got caught in the crossfire of Seth MacFarlane's twisted sense of humor. So dim those lights, settle into your most comfortable position, and let's explore every character that Family Guy has permanently sent to the great cartoon afterlife. Starting with the very first casualty that taught us this show wasn't messing around when it came to consequences. Our journey begins with Mr. Weed, Peter's original boss at the happy-go-lucky toy factory. This man first graced our screens way back in the pilot episode, catching Peter dead drunk at his workstation because apparently showing up sober was too much to ask. Mr. Weed was everything you'd expect from a factory supervisor dealing with Peter Griffin as an employee. Stern, professional, and probably questioning every career choice that led him to that moment. What made Mr. Weed fascinating wasn't just his no-nonsense attitude, but the running joke about his suspiciously theatrical mannerisms. The show never explicitly confirmed anything about his personal life, but his fabulous gestures and dramatic flair became a subtle recurring gag. Despite Peter's constant screw-ups, Mr. Weed kept giving him second chances, firing and rehiring him like it was some kind of workplace hobby. The irony is that this unusual loyalty to Peter ultimately sealed his fate. In the episode where everything went wrong, Peter decided to invite his boss over for dinner to make a good impression. Surprisingly, the evening started perfectly. Mr. Weed was genuinely impressed by Peter's home, family, and even Brian's ability to speak. He was so impressed that he offered Peter a promotion to head of toy development. That's when dinner took a deadly turn. Brian, shocked by this unexpected good news, started choking on a dinner roll. When Peter and Lois performed the Heimlich maneuver, the roll shot out of Brian's mouth like a projectile and landed directly in Mr. Weed's throat. And unlike the countless other times characters have faced mortal peril in this show, Mr. Weed actually died from choking. The funeral scene was classic Family Guy darkness. Mr. Weed left behind a videotaped will announcing that the happy-go-lucky toy factory would be demolished to make way for something called the homoerotic toy factory. It was absurd, tragic, and weirdly fitting for a character whose sexuality had been a running gag throughout his appearances. Moving from workplace fatalities to relationship drama, let's talk about Loretta Brown, Cleveland's ex-wife, who met her end in a way that perfectly summarized her entire character arc. Loretta was everything Cleveland wasn't. Where he was calm and soft-spoken, she was loud, demanding, and took no prisoners when it came to getting what she wanted. Their marriage started cracking when Quagmire's infamous inability to control himself led to an affair. During a fishing trip, a fish accidentally landed on Loretta's chest, and she took it as some kind of cosmic sign to sleep with the guy who caught it. Classic Family Guy logic, really. When Peter and Brian discovered this affair, they recognized Quagmire by his distinctive tattoo, leading to the most awkward revelation scene in television history. Cleveland's reaction to learning about the betrayal was so pathetically calm that it almost hurt to watch. Instead of rage or dramatic confrontation, he just apologized and accepted being kicked out of his own home. It wasn't until Peter and Lois called him out for being too passive that Cleveland finally found his spine and went after Quagmire. After their divorce was finalized, Loretta lived alone in a house on the hill, which sounds poetic until you remember this is Family Guy, and nothing stays peaceful for long. Her death came during one of Peter's elaborate pranks that somehow always managed to destroy Cleveland's property. This time, instead of Cleveland surviving the chaos like usual, Loretta got caught in the destruction and was crushed by falling debris. The reason behind Loretta's permanent exit was actually practical rather than narrative. Her voice actress, Alex Borstein, who also voices Lois, found Loretta's gravelly voice too difficult and painful to perform. Rather than recast the character, the writers decided to kill her off permanently, which honestly feels like the most Family Guy solution possible. Speaking of deaths that came out of nowhere, Horace's demise was particularly heartbreaking for fans of the Drunken Clam. This guy had been serving drinks to Peter, Quagmire, Joe, and Cleveland since the early seasons, surviving multiple near-death experiences that should have killed any normal bartender. He'd been shot, knocked unconscious, and even survived a fire, leading viewers to believe he was practically immortal. His luck finally ran out during a softball game between the Drunken Clam and Goldman's Pharmacy. Jerome, brought in as a ringer for Mort's team, was at bat when Horace tried to strike him out. Instead of a strikeout, Horace got struck down permanently. The episode revealed his death so casually that it almost felt cruel. But that's exactly the kind of dark humor Family Guy specializes in. The aftermath was even more devastating. The Drunken Clam was set to close permanently, which would have destroyed one of the show's most important locations. Peter tried everything to save the bar, but it was Jerome himself, the man who accidentally killed Horace, who stepped up to buy the establishment and keep it running. It was a surprisingly touching resolution to a tragic situation. Now let's talk about Peter's father, or at least the man he thought was his father for most of his life. Francis Griffin was the embodiment of strict Irish Catholic values, taken to an uncomfortable extreme. His dislike of Lois simply because she was Protestant created constant family tension, and his general disappointment in Peter was palpable in every scene they shared. When Francis retired and moved in with the Griffin family, he transformed their home into what looked like a Catholic gift shop explosion. Crucifixes appeared in every room. Religious imagery covered the walls, and the atmosphere became so oppressive that Peter actually convinced the Pope to visit and talk some sense into his father. The fact that Francis accused the Pope of going soft tells you everything you need to know about his personality. Francis met his end during Meg's birthday party, which was already going poorly because Peter was, as usual, being a complete embarrassment. While attempting one of his signature stupid stunts, Peter accidentally caused an accident that put Francis in the hospital. On his deathbed, Francis had some final words for his son that were both cruel and oddly accurate. He called Peter a fat, stinking drunk, which honestly wasn't wrong, but the timing made it particularly harsh. The revelation that Francis wasn't even Peter's biological father came during therapy sessions afterward. Peter discovered his real father was an Irishman named Mickey McFinnigan, who only accepted Peter after he proved himself in a drinking contest. It was a twisted validation of everything Francis had criticized about Peter's character. Peter's mother, Thelma Griffin, also received the permanent death treatment, though her passing was handled with less dramatic flair. She died of a stroke at the beginning of an episode that quickly shifted focus to Peter getting involved with an older woman, which was weird timing even by Family Guy standards. Thelma had always been a complex character, technically nicer than Francis, but carrying her own set of serious problems. She was a smoker, gambler, and alcoholic who had created several traumatic childhood memories for Peter through her neglectful and sometimes abusive behavior. Her habit of dropping bombshells on Peter whenever she visited made every appearance feel like an emotional landmine. The most shocking revelation came when Peter needed his birth certificate and discovered he wasn't born in America but in Mexico. Thelma had gone there to terminate her pregnancy after learning Peter's real father was an Irish drunk, but changed her mind after giving birth and smuggled baby Peter back to the United States. She then married Francis to give Peter a father figure, creating the lie that lasted Peter's entire childhood. Moving into the realm of characters that almost nobody mourned, Doug's death was announced so casually that it felt like an afterthought. This preschool rival of Stewie's had been a thorn in the baby's side for multiple episodes, representing everything Stewie hated about other children his age. Their rivalry started over playground politics and escalated into full-scale warfare, complete with campaign strategies and political maneuvering when Doug ran unopposed for snack captain. Stewie's terror at the thought of Doug gaining any kind of political experience, even at the preschool level, led to some of the show's most absurd storylines involving toddler espionage and election fraud. The episode ended with Stewie wearing the snack captain hat and casually mentioning that Doug had died in a commuter plane crash that morning. The matter-of-fact delivery and complete lack of emotional response from anyone made it clear that Doug's death was meant to be darkly comedic rather than tragic. Fans were actually relieved to see the annoying character permanently removed from the show. Bertram's death was far more dramatic and tied into one of Family Guy's most science fiction-heavy storylines. As Stewie's artificially conceived half-brother, Bertram represented a legitimate threat to Stewie's intellectual supremacy and served as his most formidable opponent throughout multiple episodes. Their first encounter inside Peter's reproductive system established them as equals in terms of intelligence and ruthlessness. After forming a temporary alliance based on their mutual hatred of Lois, the two babies eventually turned on each other in a conflict that escalated beyond playground politics into actual warfare involving time travel and assassination attempts. Bertram's master plan involved traveling back in time to eliminate one of Stewie's ancestors, Leonardo da Vinci, thereby erasing Stewie from existence entirely. The fact that he actually succeeded in killing da Vinci showed just how dangerous and competent Bertram could be when properly motivated. However, Stewie proved to be the superior strategist by tracking Bertram down through time and ending their rivalry permanently. The execution scene, where Stewie asks Bertram about his favorite bottled water before killing him, demonstrated the cold calculation that made Stewie such a compelling character. Unlike Doug's casual disposal, Bertram's death felt earned through multiple episodes of build-up and character development. The double murder episode stands out as one of Family Guy's most ambitious attempts at sustained storytelling across a full episode length. The mystery dinner party format allowed the writers to eliminate multiple characters while providing entertainment value through the whodunit structure. Muriel Goldman's death during this episode felt particularly cruel because she had never been anything more than a background character who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. As Mort's wife, she was essentially a female version of his neurotic personality, which made their relationship believable but didn't give her much individual characterization. The revelation that she had been exchanging mysterious messages with James Woods created false suspense about her potential involvement in the murders, but she was ultimately just another victim caught up in someone else's revenge scheme. Her funeral scene showed how little impact she had made on the community, with even her husband and son seeming relatively unaffected by her death. Diane Simmons represented the episode's true villain and most shocking revelation. As Tom Tucker's longtime co-anchor, she had been a background presence for years without showing any signs of homicidal tendencies. Her transformation from professional newswoman to calculating murderer demonstrated how deeply personal rejections and professional disappointments could push someone over the edge. The motive behind her killing spree was painfully relatable in its pettiness. Being dumped by James Woods for a younger woman and facing replacement by a younger co-anchor as she turned 40 created the perfect storm of humiliation and desperation. Her methodical approach to framing Tom Tucker for the murders showed intelligence and planning that made her genuinely dangerous. Diane's final confrontation with Lois provided the classic villain monologue moment where all her motivations were revealed. The irony of being killed by Stewie, a baby, after successfully eliminating multiple adult targets added the kind of dark humor that Family Guy specialized in creating. Patty Tanager's death was perhaps the most satisfying for viewers who had endured his annoying catchphrase and constant attempts to start fights over nothing. This short, aggressive man represented everything irritating about people who create drama where none needs to exist. His role as the boss of a car dealership where Brian worked temporarily showed that his obnoxious personality wasn't limited to casual encounters. Even in professional settings, he couldn't resist making inappropriate comments and stirring up unnecessary conflict with his employees and customers. The poetic justice of his death came when he tried to start a fight with someone operating a military tank. His final words, maintaining his catchphrase even while facing certain doom, showed that he was committed to his obnoxious personality right until the end. The audience's reaction to his death was overwhelmingly positive. proving that sometimes characters are specifically designed to be eliminated. The deaths of Angela and Mayor Adam West carried more emotional weight because they were tied to the real-life passing of their voice actors. These weren't creative decisions made for storyline purposes, but necessary responses to losing the talented people who brought these characters to life. Angela's character arc, from hostile supervisor to lonely woman seeking connection, provided some of Peter's most uncomfortable workplace storylines. Her sexual harassment of Peter while threatening his job security created situations that were both comedically awkward and genuinely problematic by today's standards. Her backstory, revealing years of loneliness and isolation, made her desperate actions more understandable without excusing them. The resolution where Peter dresses up to take her on a fake date showed his capacity for kindness even when dealing with someone who had made his life difficult. Carrie Fisher's death in real life meant that Angela's character had to be written out permanently. The funeral scene in her honor served as both a farewell to the character and a tribute to the actress who had voiced her. Peter's mistake of ending up at the wrong funeral added typical Family Guy humor to what was otherwise a genuinely touching moment. Mayor Adam West's death marked the end of one of the show's most beloved recurring characters. His wonderfully insane personality and possibly corrupt political practices had provided countless moments of absurd humor throughout his long tenure as Quahog's mayor. The real Adam West's connection to his animated counterpart made the character feel more authentic and grounded despite his completely unrealistic behavior and dialogue. His brief challenge from Lois during her political phase showed that even incompetent leadership was preferable to the corruption that inevitably followed. His marriage to Carol Pewterschmidt, Lois's sister, created additional family connections that made his death more personally impactful for the main characters. The tribute episode where Brian petitioned to rename the high school after Mayor West provided proper closure for a character who had been part of the show's fabric for over 16 seasons. The ghost appearance at the end where Mayor West saves Brian from falling off a cliff gave the character one final moment of heroism and showed that death couldn't completely remove him from the Family Guy universe. His replacement by Wild West as mayor acknowledged that the character was irreplaceable while allowing the show to continue. These permanent deaths in Family Guy serve multiple purposes beyond simple shock value. They demonstrate that actions can have genuine consequences, even in a cartoon universe known for its resurrection-running gags. Some characters were eliminated because they had served their narrative purpose, others because fan reaction made their continued presence counterproductive, and some because real-world circumstances forced the writer's hands. The variety in how these deaths were handled shows the range of Family Guy's storytelling capabilities, from casual mentions that treat death as an afterthought to elaborate murder mystery episodes that build tension across an entire episode. The show has found multiple ways to permanently remove characters while maintaining its signature dark humor. The emotional impact of these deaths varies significantly based on character development and audience attachment. Long-running characters like Mayor West and Horace created genuine sadness among fans, while annoying characters like Doug and Patty Tanager were celebrated in their passing. This range of reactions demonstrates how effectively the show had developed distinct personalities for even its minor recurring characters. What makes these permanent deaths particularly interesting is how they contrast with Family Guy's usual approach to cartoon violence. The show regularly features deaths that are immediately reversed or ignored, making the permanent ones stand out as genuinely significant events. When a character stays dead in this universe, it carries extra weight, because viewers know it's not the norm. The practical reasons behind some of these deaths, such as voice actor availability or fan reaction, show how external factors can influence creative decisions in long-running animated series. The writers have generally handled these necessary eliminations with appropriate respect while maintaining the show's comedic tone. Looking back at this collection of permanently deceased characters reveals the evolution of Family Guy's storytelling over its many seasons. Earlier deaths, like Mr. Weed, were often accidental consequences of the show's chaotic humor, while later deaths, like those in the murder mystery episode, showed more deliberate narrative planning. The show's willingness to permanently eliminate characters demonstrates confidence in its ability to create new sources of humor and conflict without relying on the same recurring personalities indefinitely. This creative flexibility has helped Family Guy maintain freshness across its extended run, while still honoring the contributions of departed characters. These deaths also serve as reminders that even in the most outrageous fictional universes, some actions cannot be undone. They provide moments of genuine consequence in a show that otherwise operates on cartoon logic, where nothing permanent ever happens to the main characters. So there you have it, fellow insomniacs and Family Guy enthusiasts. A complete tour through the surprisingly extensive graveyard of characters who didn't make it back from their final Family Guy appearances. From workplace accidents to murder mysteries, from natural causes to tank-related incidents, the show has found creative ways to permanently remove characters while maintaining its signature blend of dark humor and unexpected heart. Sweet dreams, and remember, in the world of Family Guy, even cartoon death can sometimes be permanent. Have you ever wondered what makes Family Guy the perfect show to fall asleep to? Tonight, we're diving deep into the wonderfully weird world of Quahog to uncover some fascinating facts that might just help you understand why millions of people drift off to this animated chaos every single night. But first, let me ask you something. What if I told you that the baby genius who plots world domination actually has one of the most tragic character arcs in television history? Or that there's a scientific reason why Peter Griffin's voice might be the ultimate sleep aid? Stick around, because by the end of this video, you'll never look at your bedtime Family Guy marathon the same way again. Let's start with something that'll blow your mind. Stewie Griffin, that diabolical infant with the posh British accent, wasn't always the character we know today. In the original concept, he was supposed to be much darker and more sinister. The show's creator, Seth MacFarlane, initially envisioned him as a genuinely evil character whose plans would occasionally succeed. But here's the fascinating part that most fans don't realize. Stewie's entire personality is built on a foundation of insecurity and loneliness that makes him oddly relatable, especially during those late-night viewing sessions when you're feeling a bit isolated yourself. The genius baby's accent tells us everything we need to know about human psychology. In one of the show's most revealing moments, Stewie admits in therapy that his British accent is completely fake. He adopted it to sound smarter and more sophisticated than everyone around him. It's essentially vocal armor designed to protect his vulnerable core. This resonates with so many viewers because we all put on masks to hide our insecurities. When you're lying in bed at 3 a.m, there's something comforting about a character who's also struggling with authenticity. But here's where it gets really interesting. The show deliberately keeps it ambiguous whether other characters can actually understand Stewie. Sometimes they respond to him. Sometimes they completely ignore his elaborate monologues about world domination. This creates a dreamlike quality that perfectly mirrors the state between waking and sleeping. Your brain doesn't have to work too hard to follow rigid logic because the show itself operates on dream logic. Speaking of dream logic, let's talk about the show's relationship with time and reality. Family Guy is famous for its cutaway gags that transport viewers to completely different scenarios mid-episode. One moment Peter is arguing with Lois about dinner. The next moment we're watching a historical flashback about Napoleon's bathroom habits. These rapid shifts in context actually mimic the way our minds work when we're falling asleep, jumping from thought to thought without linear connection. The show's approach to continuity is another sleep-inducing factor. Characters die and come back to life, major events get completely forgotten by the next episode, and the family somehow never ages despite running for over 2 decades. This lack of consequences creates a safe space for your mind. You don't need to worry about emotional investment or following complex storylines. It's mental comfort food. Now let's examine the voice acting, because this is where the science gets really interesting. Seth MacFarlane voices multiple main characters, including Peter, Brian, and Stewie. The consistency of hearing the same vocal patterns creates a subconscious sense of familiarity and safety. Peter's voice in particular has a rhythmic, almost hypnotic quality that many sleep specialists would recognize as naturally soothing. The slight nasal tone and steady pacing can actually help regulate breathing patterns. Brian Griffin represents something unique in the Family Guy universe. As the talking dog who serves as the show's voice of reason, he often delivers philosophical observations and cultural commentary. But here's what makes him perfect for sleep viewing. His conversations with Stewie frequently dive into existential topics without becoming too heavy or anxiety-provoking. They discuss the meaning of life, mortality, and purpose in ways that feel profound but never overwhelming. It's like having a gentle philosophical discussion as you drift off to sleep. The show's approach to controversial topics is surprisingly sophisticated when you analyze it from a sleep psychology perspective. While Family Guy is known for pushing boundaries, it does so in such an over-the-top way that it becomes almost cartoonish rather than genuinely disturbing. This allows viewers to process difficult subjects without the emotional intensity that would keep them awake. It's social commentary wrapped in enough absurdity to feel safe. Let's dive into the Griffin family dynamics, because they reveal something fascinating about comfort viewing. Despite all their dysfunction, the family always comes back together by the end of each episode. Peter might do something incredibly stupid. Lois might lose her temper. Meg might face another humiliation, but they remain a unit. This predictable structure provides emotional security. No matter how chaotic things get, you know everything will essentially reset by the next episode. The show's treatment of Meg Griffin deserves special attention. As the perpetually misunderstood teenager who faces constant rejection and ridicule, she represents the part of ourselves we're most insecure about. But the show's portrayal of her suffering is so exaggerated that it becomes therapeutic rather than depressing. It's like having your own adolescent anxieties reflected back to you in such an extreme way that they lose their power to hurt you. Chris Griffin, the dim-witted but kind-hearted son, provides another layer of comfort. His innocence and genuine sweetness create moments of unexpected warmth throughout the show. When everything else is cynical and sarcastic, Chris offers glimpses of pure, uncomplicated emotion. These moments work like pressure valves, releasing tension just when the cynicism might become overwhelming. The show's relationship with pop culture creates a unique viewing experience that's perfect for repeat watching. The references span decades, from obscure 70s television shows to current internet memes. This means different jokes land differently depending on your age, mood, and current knowledge base. You can watch the same episode multiple times and discover new layers, but the discovery process is gentle and rewarding rather than demanding. Family Guy's animation style contributes to its sleep friendliness in subtle but important ways. The character designs are simple and rounded, avoiding sharp angles or jarring visual elements that might startle viewers. The color palette is warm and familiar, dominated by the cozy yellows and browns of the Griffin home. Even during action sequences or fantastical cutaways, the visual style remains consistent and non-threatening. The show's musical elements deserve recognition too. From Stewie and Brian's elaborate musical numbers to Peter's improvised songs, music is woven throughout the series in ways that create rhythm and flow. These musical interludes often serve as natural breaking points, giving your brain permission to zone out or drift away. The songs are catchy enough to be memorable, but rarely complex enough to demand active listening. One of the most brilliant aspects of Family Guy's sleep appeal is its relationship with repetition. The show has been running for so long that certain gags and character interactions have become ritualistic. Peter fighting the giant chicken, Stewie's elaborate revenge plots against Lois, Brian's pretentious literary aspirations. These recurring elements create a sense of familiarity that can be deeply comforting for regular viewers. The show's approach to violence is another key factor. While there's plenty of cartoon violence, it's always presented in such an unrealistic way that it never feels genuinely threatening. Characters get blown up, shot, crushed, and dismembered, only to appear completely fine in the next scene. This consequence-free violence allows viewers to experience excitement and tension without any lasting anxiety. Let's talk about the show's treatment of mortality, because this might be the most important element for sleep viewing. Death appears frequently in Family Guy, but it's always treated as either temporary or comedic rather than genuinely tragic. Characters die and return, discuss death casually, and face mortal peril without real consequences. For viewers dealing with their own mortality anxieties, especially late at night, this approach can be surprisingly therapeutic. The writing style of Family Guy creates a unique rhythm that mirrors natural sleep patterns. Episodes often start with high-energy scenarios that gradually wind down through various subplots and cutaways. By the time you reach the resolution, the pacing has naturally slowed, making it easier to transition into actual sleep. It's like the show is designed to help you power down. Family Guy's relationship with nostalgia is complex and comforting. The show constantly references and parodies elements from decades past, creating a sense of collective cultural memory. Whether it's a reference to an 80s movie, a 70s television show, or a 90s commercial, these callbacks create connections to simpler times. For many viewers, this nostalgic element provides emotional comfort that eases the transition to sleep. The show's approach to relationships and romance offers another layer of sleep-friendly content. Despite all the dysfunction and crude humor, there are genuine moments of love and connection between characters. Peter and Lois, despite their constant conflicts, clearly love each other. Stewie and Brian, despite their differences, have formed an everyday, unlikely but deep friendship. These relationship dynamics provide emotional warmth without demanding too much investment. Here's something most people don't realize about Family Guy's structure. The show operates on multiple levels of engagement. You can watch it as pure background noise, letting the familiar voices and music wash over you. You can engage with the surface-level humor and sight gags. Or you can dive deep into the cultural references and character development. This flexibility makes it perfect for different stages of falling asleep. The show's treatment of everyday situations is particularly sleep-friendly. Many episodes revolve around mundane domestic issues like household chores, neighbor disputes, or family dinners that somehow spiral into elaborate adventures. But no matter how wild things get, they always return to the familiar setting of the Griffin home. This creates a sense of adventure within safety, excitement within security. Family Guy's approach to current events and social issues provides another comfort layer. The show comments on politics, social trends, and cultural phenomena, but always through the lens of cartoon absurdity. This allows viewers to engage with real-world concerns without the anxiety that usually accompanies such topics. It's like having a pressure release valve for contemporary stress. The show's episodic nature means you never have to worry about missing crucial plot developments if you fall asleep mid-episode. While there are occasionally multi-part episodes or recurring storylines, the vast majority of episodes are self-contained. This removes the anxiety about keeping up with complex narratives and allows your mind to relax completely. As we wrap up this deep dive into why Family Guy has become the ultimate sleep companion for millions of viewers, remember that comfort viewing is a deeply personal experience. What works for one person might not work for another, but there's something undeniably special about a show that can make you laugh, think, and ultimately feel at peace, all within the span of 22 minutes. The genius of Family Guy as a sleep aid lies in its perfect balance of engagement and relaxation. It's stimulating enough to occupy your conscious mind and prevent anxious thoughts from taking over, but familiar and comforting enough to allow your subconscious to begin the journey towards sleep. Whether you're drawn to Stewie's elaborate schemes, Peter's childlike wonder, or Brian's philosophical musings, there's something in this animated chaos for everyone. So the next time you find yourself reaching for that remote at bedtime, remember that you're not just choosing mindless entertainment. You're selecting a carefully crafted comfort blanket that's helped millions of people transition from the stresses of the day into peaceful rest. Sweet dreams, and remember, in Quahog, everything always works out in the end. Hey there, sleep seekers and Family Guy fans. Ever lie awake wondering just how many ridiculous jobs Peter Griffin has actually had throughout the series? Well, grab your pillow and get comfortable, because we're about to dive into the wonderfully chaotic career history of Quahog's most incompetent resident. From safety inspector to Supreme Court justice, Peter's resume reads like a fever dream, and tonight we're exploring every single bizarre position this man has somehow managed to stumble into. Picture this. You're at a job interview, and they ask where you see yourself in 5 years. Most people have a reasonable answer. Peter Griffin? Well, let's just say his interview skills are about as polished as his decision-making abilities. Yet somehow, this man has held more jobs than most people even know exist. Tonight's journey through Peter's professional mishaps is perfect for those late-night moments when you need something absurdly entertaining to drift off to. Let's start with what might be considered Peter's most stable employment, though that's not saying much. His original gig as a safety inspector at the happy-go-lucky toy factory sounds straightforward enough. Stand around, inspect toys, make sure they're safe for children. Simple, right? Wrong. This is Peter Griffin we're talking about. Even the most basic task becomes an opportunity for spectacular failure. The man whose job it was to ensure toy safety somehow found ways to make everything less safe just by being there. From toy inspection, Peter moved on to what became his longest-running employment adventure, working at the Pawtucket Brewery. Now, there's something almost poetic about Peter working at the place where his beloved Pawtucket Patriot Ale is crafted. It's like a beer enthusiast getting a job at their favorite brewery, except instead of bringing passion and expertise to the role, Peter brought his unique talent for turning any situation into chaos. On his very first day, he managed to get drunk during work hours, setting the tone for what would become years of questionable workplace behavior. The medical field has also been graced by Peter's presence, though patients probably weren't thrilled about it. During a citywide flu outbreak, when the hospital was desperately short-staffed, Peter volunteered as a nurse. This might seem noble until you discover his approach to medical care. Turns out, Peter had been faking his way through nursing duties because he was afraid of needles. Imagine being sick in the hospital and finding out your nurse has been pretending to give you medication because he's squeamish about basic medical equipment. But Peter's medical career didn't end with nursing. He somehow also worked as a doctor, which raises serious questions about the hospital's hiring practices. His approach to emergency medicine was about as effective as you'd expect. When someone's life hung in the balance, Peter's solution involved methods that would make actual medical professionals question their career choices. Law enforcement has also experienced the Peter Griffin effect. In one memorable stint, he became a sheriff in a small southern town after the Griffin family was relocated by the FBI. The job description perfectly matched Peter's skill set: hang out, eat pie, and get drunk. For once, Peter had found employment that aligned with his natural abilities. Of course, even the simplest law enforcement duties became complicated when filtered through Peter's unique worldview. His artistic side emerged when he worked as a police sketch artist. While most people struggled with Peter's unconventional artistic interpretations, his sketches turned out to be surprisingly accurate. Sometimes, raw talent manifests in the most unexpected ways, even when that talent belongs to someone who approaches every task with the subtlety of a freight train. Peter has also dabbled in hospitality, working as a motel housekeeper. His customer service approach involved inserting himself into situations where he absolutely wasn't welcome, demonstrating a complete lack of understanding about personal boundaries and professional behavior. Guests probably didn't expect their housekeeper to become an active participant in their private moments. The detective business got a taste of Peter's investigative skills when he worked as a private investigator. His noir-style internal monologue painted him as a hard-boiled detective struggling to make ends meet, but his actual investigative methods were about as sophisticated as his approach to everything else. Still, there's something charming about Peter's attempt to channel classic detective fiction, even if the execution left much to be desired. Peter's relationship with food has led to several career opportunities. He became president of the National Association for the Advancement of Fat People, turning his personal struggles with weight into a leadership role. This position actually led to some heroic moments, proving that even Peter's most self-serving endeavors can occasionally produce positive outcomes. The fishing industry experienced Peter's unique management style when he decided to become a professional fisherman. Despite having zero experience on the water, Peter approached commercial fishing with his characteristic confidence. His nautical adventures proved that enthusiasm alone isn't enough to master the complexities of maritime work, especially when that enthusiasm is accompanied by a complete lack of relevant skills. Agriculture also felt Peter's impact when he tried his hand at farming. Moving the family to the countryside for a simpler life seemed like a reasonable plan until reality set in. Farming requires knowledge, patience, and hard work, qualities that don't align with Peter's approach to life. The fact that they failed to grow a single sellable crop shouldn't surprise anyone familiar with Peter's track record. Education has been both blessed and cursed by Peter's involvement. He served as an interim principal at James Woods High, stepping in during a staffing crisis. While his administrative methods were unconventional, he did manage some positive moments, like standing up to bullies. However, his interpretation of appropriate principal behavior included outdated social media challenges and questionable disciplinary approaches. Peter also won a campaign to become school board president, though his victory came through a smear campaign against his own wife. His tenure in educational leadership was marked by the same chaos that characterizes all his endeavors, proving that putting Peter in charge of anything, especially children's education, requires a level of optimism that borders on delusion. The restaurant business has provided Peter with multiple opportunities to combine his love of food with his entrepreneurial spirit. He and Lois opened Big Pete's House of Munch, using money from a valuable coin they discovered. Restaurant ownership taught Peter that loving food and successfully serving it to customers are entirely different skills. The establishment struggled from day one, with Peter's customer service philosophy clashing with basic business principles. Not content with traditional restaurants, Peter also operated a food truck called Eat My Junk. His mobile food service brought his unique culinary vision directly to the streets, complete with creative payment processing methods that probably violated several health and business regulations. The food truck experiment demonstrated that changing venues doesn't necessarily improve outcomes when the fundamental approach remains chaotic. Environmental activism became Peter's focus when he created Gary, the no-trash cougar, a character designed to combat pollution. His environmental education methods were somewhat traumatic for young audiences, proving that good intentions don't automatically translate to effective execution. Sometimes the message gets lost when the messenger approaches their mission with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. Law enforcement experienced Peter's unique perspective again when he volunteered as a cop during a staffing shortage. Giving Peter police powers was probably one of Quahog's more questionable decisions. His interpretation of police work involved creative approaches to evidence handling and suspect interaction that would make actual officers reconsider their career choices. Corporate leadership has also been shaped by Peter's influence. When he temporarily took over as CEO of his father-in-law's company, his business philosophy involved firing experienced executives and replacing them with his drinking buddies. His product development ideas were equally revolutionary, though perhaps not in ways that traditional business schools would recommend. The tobacco industry briefly benefited from Peter's advocacy when he served as president of El Dorado Cigarette Company. His approach to corporate leadership in this role was refreshingly straightforward. Show up, sit in the office, and use his position to influence legislation. Sometimes the simplest job descriptions are the most honest. Political service has called upon Peter's talents multiple times. He worked as a press secretary, though his duties seemed to focus more on preventing static electricity than managing media relations. His understanding of political communication was about as nuanced as his approach to everything else, which is to say, not very nuanced at all. The entertainment industry has provided Peter with various opportunities to showcase his talents. He worked as a Calvin Klein model at some point in his past, proving that even Peter's physical appearance has commercial value under the right circumstances. He's also appeared in television commercials, though his performance skills might not lead to repeat bookings. Military service appears somewhere in Peter's background, though his understanding of combat protocols and chain of command was typically unconventional. His military training focused on identifying friendly forces, a concept he struggled to grasp despite repeated instruction. Telecommunications offered Peter work in telemarketing, though his target demographic was somewhat specialized. His phone skills were about as effective as you'd expect, with customer interaction following his usual pattern of creating confusion where none previously existed. Medical experimentation provided Peter with income opportunities when he volunteered for various research studies. The compensation was decent, though the side effects of participating in multiple experiments simultaneously probably weren't covered in the consent forms he definitely didn't read carefully. The hospitality industry experienced Peter's customer service philosophy when he worked various service positions. His approach to taking orders involved creative interpretations of restaurant terminology that probably confused both customers and kitchen staff. His ability to remember and accurately communicate simple requests was challenged by his tendency to overcomplicate straightforward interactions. Emergency services have been both helped and hindered by Peter's involvement. His stint as a firefighter demonstrated that good intentions and basic safety training don't always combine effectively. Sometimes the person meant to solve the problem becomes part of the problem, especially when that person approaches emergency response with Peter's unique logic. Entertainment production has benefited from Peter's creative vision. He developed television programming with the same innovative approach he brings to everything else. His understanding of audience preferences and production logistics was typically unconventional, resulting in content that probably challenged viewers' expectations in unexpected ways. Transportation services experienced Peter's customer service approach when he worked as an Uber driver. His vehicle, the situation was unconventional, and his interpersonal skills with passengers followed his established pattern of creating memorable experiences for all the wrong reasons. The pharmaceutical industry relied on Peter's expertise when he worked as a pharmacist. His approach to medication distribution and patient consultation demonstrated his unique interpretation of healthcare delivery. Customers probably received more than they bargained for in terms of personalized service. Seasonal employment has provided Peter with opportunities to spread joy as a mall Santa. His interaction with children during the holiday season showcased his gift for making lasting impressions, though not necessarily the kind that parents hope for when they bring their kids to meet Santa. Domestic management became Peter's responsibility when he worked as a house husband. His approach to household organization and family care demonstrated skills that had been hidden beneath years of workplace chaos. Sometimes the right job brings out unexpected competencies, even in the most unlikely candidates. Judicial service elevated Peter to the Supreme Court, where his legal philosophy focused on equality through unconventional means. His approach to constitutional interpretation was characteristically innovative, challenging traditional legal thinking with solutions that probably weren't covered in law school. Specialized services have utilized Peter's unique skill set in various capacities. He's worked as everything from a babysitter to a personal shopper, bringing his distinctive approach to customer service in roles that required sensitivity and attention to detail. His clients probably received more personalized attention than they anticipated. Performance arts have provided Peter with outlets for his creative expression. His musical abilities have earned him income through various venues, from street performance to wedding entertainment. His understanding of audience engagement and musical technique follows his established pattern of prioritizing enthusiasm over conventional skill. The food service industry has experienced Peter's influence in multiple capacities, from restaurant ownership to catering services. His culinary philosophy emphasizes creativity over convention, resulting in dining experiences that challenge customers' expectations about food preparation and presentation. Public safety has relied on Peter's expertise in various specialized roles, from ninja police officer to volunteer emergency responder. His approach to crime prevention and emergency management demonstrates innovative thinking that probably wasn't covered in standard training programs. Media production has benefited from Peter's creative vision in multiple formats, from cartoon development to television production. His understanding of entertainment value and audience engagement follows his characteristic approach of prioritizing memorable experiences over conventional quality standards. As we wrap up this extensive journey through Peter Griffin's career history, it's clear that his professional life has been anything but boring. From safety inspector to Supreme Court justice, from nurse to ninja cop, Peter has approached every job with the same combination of enthusiasm and chaos that defines his character. His work history reads like a collection of workplace disasters, yet somehow he keeps finding new employment opportunities. What makes Peter's career journey so entertaining is his complete lack of awareness about his own limitations. He approaches brain surgery with the same confidence he brings to flipping burgers, and somehow manages to create memorable moments in every position he holds. His employers probably don't forget him quickly, though not necessarily for the reasons they'd prefer. The sheer variety of Peter's employment history suggests either an incredibly diverse skill set or an amazing ability to convince people to hire him, despite obvious red flags. The truth is probably somewhere in between, though the evidence strongly suggests that Peter's interview skills don't accurately represent his job performance capabilities. Tonight, as you drift off to sleep, you can rest easy knowing that somewhere in the animated universe, Peter Griffin is probably starting a new job tomorrow, bringing his unique brand of workplace creativity to yet another unsuspecting industry. His career adventures remind us that sometimes the most entertaining stories come from the most unlikely sources, and that competence isn't always required for memorable employment experiences. Sweet dreams, and remember, no matter how chaotic your own work life gets, it's probably more manageable than Peter Griffin's professional journey through the working world of Quahog and beyond. Picture this. It's 2 a.m. You're tossing and turning, unable to fall asleep. Your mind is racing with thoughts about tomorrow's responsibilities, that awkward conversation from 3 weeks ago, and whether you left the stove on. What you need isn't another meditation app or white noise machine. You need something perfectly mundane, yet oddly fascinating. You need random Family Guy facts that will occupy just enough of your brain to let sleep creep in without being so exciting that they keep you awake. Tonight we're diving into the wonderfully weird world of Quahog, with facts so specific and delightfully pointless that they'll have you drifting off faster than Peter Griffin at a feminist poetry reading. Let's start with something that sounds completely made up but is absolutely real. The chicken fights between Peter Griffin and Ernie the Giant Chicken have collectively lasted over 20 minutes of screen time across all episodes. 20 minutes. That's longer than most sitcom episodes dedicate to their main plot. These epic battles began over something so ridiculously petty that it perfectly encapsulates the show's absurdist humor. An expired coupon. Not a life-changing amount of money, not a family heirloom, but a piece of paper that saves you maybe 50 cents on chicken feed. Yet this trivial dispute has spawned some of the most elaborate and destructive fight sequences in television history. The creators didn't plan for these fights to become a recurring element. The first chicken fight was supposed to be a one-off gag, but audience response was so positive that it became a signature element of the show. Each subsequent battle had to top the previous one in terms of scope and destruction. They've fought in the streets, crashed through buildings, battled in the sky, and even taken their conflict underwater. The animators spend weeks choreographing these sequences, treating them with the same attention to detail that major studios reserve for blockbuster action films. Here's something that might surprise you about the show's production process. Every episode of Family Guy requires approximately 15,000 individual drawings. In the digital age, this seems almost quaint, but the show maintains a hand-drawn aesthetic that demands incredible attention to detail. Each character's movement, each facial expression, each background element starts as a pencil sketch. The animators have developed shortcuts and techniques over the years, but the fundamental process remains surprisingly labor-intensive. The voice actors record their lines before any animation begins, which means the animators have to match the drawings to the vocal performances rather than the other way around. This creates some interesting challenges. Seth MacFarlane voices multiple characters, and he often has conversations with himself during recording sessions. The sound engineers have become experts at seamlessly blending these multi-character performances, creating the illusion that Peter, Brian, and Stewie are actually in the same room talking to each other. Speaking of voices, here's a fact that demonstrates just how integral Seth MacFarlane is to the show's DNA. He voices 4 main characters, plus dozens of recurring characters and one-off personalities. When he temporarily stepped back from the show to focus on other projects, the producers seriously considered ending Family Guy rather than recasting his roles. They eventually found ways to work around his reduced availability, but it highlighted how deeply connected the show is to MacFarlane's specific vocal talents and comedic sensibilities. The show's relationship with censorship has produced some genuinely bizarre situations over the years. There are jokes that were cut from the television broadcast but restored for DVD releases, creating alternate versions of episodes that exist in different formats. Some episodes have different running times, depending on where and how you watch them. The censors have made requests that seem arbitrary to outside observers. Violence is often acceptable, but certain types of language or visual gags get flagged for removal. This has led to some creative workarounds by the writing team. They've developed a sort of code for getting controversial material past the censors. Sometimes they'll include an extremely offensive joke that they know will be rejected, making their actually intended joke seem mild by comparison. It's a psychological negotiation tactic that has become part of their standard writing process. Here's something that sounds like trivia, but actually reveals something profound about how the show is made. The writer's room keeps a collection of rejected joke ideas that they call the too weird pile. These aren't jokes that are too offensive or inappropriate, but rather concepts that are so strange or specific that they don't fit into any episode. Occasionally, they'll build an entire storyline around one of these orphaned ideas, which explains why some episodes feel like fever dreams that shouldn't work but somehow do. The show's approach to celebrity cameos is more strategic than it might appear. When famous people appear as themselves, they're usually playing exaggerated versions of their public personas rather than trying to seem likable or relatable. The writers deliberately lean into whatever characteristic or controversy that celebrity is known for, creating appearances that feel more like roasts than typical guest spots. This approach has occasionally caused problems when celebrities change their minds about how they want to be portrayed, leading to last-minute script changes or even canceled episodes. Family Guy's relationship with its own continuity is fascinatingly inconsistent. The writers will sometimes reference events from episodes that aired years earlier, demonstrating that they do pay attention to their own history. But they'll just as often completely ignore or contradict previously established facts about the characters or their world. This isn't laziness or poor planning, but rather a deliberate choice to prioritize individual episode quality over series-long consistency. The animation team has developed a visual shorthand for different types of scenes that regular viewers might not consciously notice but definitely feel. Flashback sequences use slightly different color palettes and animation techniques. Dream sequences have their own visual language. Even the way characters move changes depending on whether a scene is meant to be realistic or cartoonish within the show's already cartoonish world. Here's a production detail that reveals how much thought goes into seemingly throwaway moments. Background characters and crowd scenes aren't just randomly generated. The animators create specific individuals with their own implied backstories, even though these characters might only appear for a few seconds. They've developed a whole population of Quahog residents who appear in multiple episodes, creating an illusion of a lived-in community, even though most viewers would never consciously recognize these recurring background players. The show's musical numbers require a completely different production pipeline from regular episodes. They start with Seth MacFarlane or other musically inclined staff members creating rough recordings of the songs. Then professional arrangers develop full orchestrations. The voice actors record their vocals to these arrangements. Only after all the music is complete do the animators begin creating visuals to match. This process can take months for a single musical sequence, which explains why these segments often feel more polished and elaborate than the surrounding episode. Family Guy's approach to holiday episodes reveals something interesting about how the writers view their own show. They treat holiday specials as opportunities to experiment with different formats or storytelling techniques. Rather than simply plugging their characters into traditional holiday scenarios, Christmas episodes might be musicals, Halloween episodes might be horror parodies, and so on. This keeps the show from falling into the predictable patterns that plague many long-running series. The show's merchandise presents some unique challenges because of how the characters are designed. Peter Griffin's proportions don't translate well to three-dimensional objects, leading to action figures and toys that look subtly wrong. The merchandising team has had to develop modified character designs specifically for products, creating versions of the characters that maintain their essential appearance while being more practically manufacturable. Here's something that demonstrates the show's attention to detail in unexpected areas. The writers have created complete backstories for characters who have never appeared on screen. They know the names and personalities of Brian's parents, even though this information has never been relevant to any episode. They've developed detailed histories for minor recurring characters that extend far beyond anything that's ever been shown. This background work helps maintain consistency in how these characters behave, even when they're only making brief appearances. The show's relationship with its own spin-offs created some interesting continuity challenges. When the Cleveland show was in production, storylines had to be coordinated between writing teams to ensure that Cleveland's appearances on Family Guy didn't contradict what was happening on his own show. This led to some awkward scheduling situations where episodes had to be rewritten or delayed to maintain consistency across both series. Family Guy's approach to celebrity deaths has evolved over the years in response to changing cultural sensitivities. Early episodes would sometimes include jokes about recently deceased public figures, but the writers now generally avoid this territory. Unless enough time has passed for such references to feel like historical commentary rather than current events humor. This self-imposed guideline has prevented some potentially awkward situations where episodes would have aired shortly after unexpected celebrity deaths. The show's animators have developed specialized techniques for different types of scenes that regular viewers probably don't notice but contribute to the overall viewing experience. Fight scenes use different frame rates and animation principles than dialogue scenes. Fantasy sequences might employ completely different artistic styles. The animators treat each type of scene as requiring its own approach, making Family Guy more visually diverse than many people realize. Here's a fact that illustrates how deeply the show has embedded itself in popular culture. The writers receive hundreds of suggestions from fans every week, ranging from episode ideas to character suggestions to complaints about plot inconsistencies. While they can't use fan-submitted ideas for legal reasons, these communications help them understand how their audience perceives the show and what elements are most popular or problematic. The show's approach to social media and internet culture has changed dramatically over its run. Early episodes barely acknowledged the existence of the internet, while recent seasons treat social media and online culture as fundamental aspects of modern life. The writers have had to learn new forms of humor and reference that didn't exist when the show began, essentially evolving their comedy style to match changing technology and communication patterns. Family Guy's international versions present fascinating translation challenges. Jokes that rely on American cultural references or wordplay often can't be directly translated, leading to completely different jokes in dubbed versions. Some countries have created culturally specific versions of certain episodes, replacing American references with local equivalents. This has resulted in versions of Family Guy that are almost entirely different shows while maintaining the same basic characters and plot lines. The show's writers maintain detailed style guides that specify how each character speaks, what types of references they would make, and how they would react in different situations. These guides help maintain consistency across different writers and ensure that characters don't drift too far from their established personalities. Brian's dialogue, for example, follows specific patterns that reflect his pretentious intellectual aspirations, while Chris's speech patterns reflect his slower mental processing speed. Here's something that reveals the show's commitment to its own absurdist logic. The writers have created internal rules for how the show's universe works that they follow even when these rules are never explicitly stated. They know how long it takes to travel between different locations in Quahog, which characters know each other, and what each character's financial situation is like. This background consistency helps ground even the most ridiculous storylines in something resembling reality. The show's merchandise licensing deals have created some genuinely strange products over the years. There have been Family Guy-themed everything from breakfast cereals to car accessories to wedding decorations. The licensing team has to consider whether each potential product fits with the show's brand, leading to some philosophical discussions about what Family Guy represents as a cultural entity beyond just a television program. Family Guy's approach to controversial topics has become more sophisticated over the years, moving from simple shock value toward more nuanced satirical commentary. The writers now spend considerable time researching topics before writing about them, ensuring that their jokes come from a place of understanding rather than ignorance. This doesn't mean they avoid controversial subjects, but rather that they approach them with more intentionality. The show's animators have developed a visual signature that makes Family Guy immediately recognizable, even in brief clips or promotional materials. This involves not just character design but also choices about color palettes, camera angles, and motion principles. New animators joining the team have to learn these specific techniques to ensure visual consistency across different episodes and seasons. Here's a production detail that most viewers would never think about, but significantly impacts the viewing experience. The show's sound design team creates distinct audio signatures for different characters and locations. Peter's footsteps sound different from Brian's. The Griffin house has its own acoustic characteristics, and even the way doors close varies depending on the context. These subtle audio cues help create the illusion of a consistent physical world, even though everything is animated. As you drift off to sleep tonight, remember that somewhere in the world, animators are drawing the next batch of Family Guy episodes, voice actors are recording dialogue for situations that don't exist, and writers are debating whether jokes about topics you've never considered are funny enough to include in a television show. The machinery of entertainment continues turning even while you rest, creating the content that will occupy your mind during tomorrow night's journey toward sleep. Sweet dreams. And remember that in the grand scheme of things, we're all just characters in someone else's animated universe, trying to make sense of the absurd situations we find ourselves in. Ever wondered what happens when you dive deep into the chaotic world of Quahog at 3 in the morning? Tonight we're exploring the most bizarre, hilarious, and downright weird facts about Family Guy that'll keep your mind occupied while you drift off to sleep. From hidden Easter eggs to behind-the-scenes secrets that even longtime fans don't know. This collection of random Family Guy trivia is perfect for those late-night moments when you need something entertaining but not too stimulating. Picture this. You're lying in bed, scrolling through your phone, and suddenly you're wondering about the strangest details from America's most controversial animated family. Well, you're in luck, because we've gathered dozens of fascinating tidbits that reveal just how deep the rabbit hole goes in Seth MacFarlane's animated universe. Let's start with something that might surprise you about the show's origins. Family Guy actually premiered in 1999, making it older than The Sopranos, Lost, and even The Office. But here's the kicker. The show was canceled not once, but twice by Fox. The first cancellation happened in 2002 after 3 seasons, and then again in 2005 after being brought back for a 4th season. What saved it the second time? DVD sales and reruns on Adult Swim were so successful that Fox had no choice but to bring it back permanently. Speaking of cancellations, did you know that the famous episode where Stewie and Brian get locked in a bank vault was actually written as a potential series finale? The writers thought the show might not get renewed, so they created this bottle episode as a way to give fans closure while keeping production costs low. It ended up becoming one of the most beloved episodes in the entire series. Here's something that'll make you appreciate the voice acting even more. Seth MacFarlane voices 4 main characters: Peter, Brian, Stewie, and Glenn Quagmire. But what's really impressive is that he can switch between all these voices seamlessly during recording sessions. The man is basically having conversations with himself for hours at a time. Imagine being in that recording booth and watching him argue with himself as Peter and Stewie. Now let's talk about some hidden details you've probably never noticed. In the opening credits, when the family is sitting on the couch, Stewie is always holding a different object. Sometimes it's a teddy bear, sometimes a ray gun, and occasionally it's something completely random, like a pineapple. The animators change this detail regularly, but it's so subtle that most viewers never pick up on it. The Griffin's address has actually been revealed multiple times throughout the series, but it keeps changing. Sometimes they live at 31 Spooner Street, other times it's 29 Spooner Street. This isn't continuity error. It's an intentional joke about how cartoon families can basically live anywhere the writers need them to live for the sake of a gag. Here's a weird one. Meg's full name is actually Megatron Griffin. This was revealed in one episode as a throwaway joke, but it's technically canon. Her parents named her after the Transformers villain, which honestly explains a lot about why she turned out the way she did. Imagine going through high school with that on your birth certificate. The chicken fights between Peter and Ernie the Giant Chicken aren't just random acts of cartoon violence. They're actually parodies of classic action movie fight scenes. Each fight references different films, from They Live to The Matrix. The writers spend enormous amounts of time choreographing these sequences to match specific cinematic moments frame by frame. Speaking of references, Family Guy holds the unofficial record for most pop culture references in a single animated series. The writers keep a database of potential references organized by category, decade, and obscurity level. They literally have spreadsheets dedicated to tracking which celebrities they've already made fun of and which ones are still fair game. Here's something about Brian that might change how you see him. His character was originally supposed to be much more of a background character, like a regular family pet who occasionally made sarcastic comments. But Seth MacFarlane enjoyed voicing him so much that Brian evolved into basically being Seth's mouthpiece for political and social commentary. This is why Brian often sounds like he's giving a college lecture. He essentially is. The Conway Twitty cutaways aren't just random musical interludes. They serve a specific purpose in television production. When episodes run short, the writers can insert these musical segments to pad out the runtime without having to animate new scenes or write additional dialogue. It's brilliant efficiency disguised as absurdist humor. Cleveland's house has been destroyed and rebuilt more times than any other location in the series. The writers keep track of this, and it's actually become a running competition among the staff to see who can come up with the most creative ways to demolish Cleveland's property. His house is basically the Kenny McCormick of buildings. Here's a detail about Quagmire that most people miss. His house number is 29. Peter's is 31, and Cleveland's was 33 before he moved away. But Joe's house number has never been consistently established, which has led to fan theories that he doesn't actually own his house and is just perpetually house-sitting for someone else. The famous "Whose line is it anyway" reference, where Peter lists random words, isn't actually random. Each word was carefully chosen to represent a different category of Family Guy humor. They're basically a roadmap of the show's comedic philosophy, hidden in plain sight. Stewie's accent has gradually changed over the years, from a thick British aristocrat voice to something more American. This wasn't accidental. Seth MacFarlane has said that maintaining the original accent was physically exhausting, so he's slowly been relaxing it as the series progressed. If you go back and watch early episodes, the difference is striking. The Pawtucket Brewery where Peter works is actually based on a real brewery in Rhode Island. The exterior shots are rotoscoped from actual footage of the Narragansett Brewery, though the interior is completely fictional. Local Rhode Islanders often spot familiar landmarks in the background of various episodes. Here's something about the show's animation. The characters' eyes are deliberately drawn to be slightly different sizes. Peter's left eye is always drawn slightly larger than his right, which gives him that perpetually confused expression. This asymmetry was added specifically to make him look more dopey and lovable. The reason death appears so frequently in early seasons is because the writers were originally planning to kill off a main character in every season finale, but Fox executives weren't comfortable with the concept. So death became a recurring character instead of a plot device, which is actually much funnier in hindsight. Lois's maiden name is Pewterschmidt, but her middle name has been given as both Marie and Nicole in different episodes. The writers claim this is intentional, suggesting that Lois has been lying about her middle name for years for reasons that will never be explained. The evil monkey in Chris's closet was originally supposed to be revealed as Chris's imaginary friend, but the writers decided it was funnier if he was completely real and just randomly living in their house. This decision led to one of the series' most beloved recurring characters. Here's something about the show's timeline. The Griffins have been celebrating the same holidays for over 20 years of real time, but they never age. However, the writers occasionally drop hints about the passage of time through background details like changing technology and evolving fashion trends in crowd scenes. The reason Peter's boss, Mr. Weed, died in such a bizarre way, choking on dinner rolls while watching Popeye, was because the writers wanted to establish that anyone could die at any time in the Family Guy universe for completely ridiculous reasons. It set the precedent for the show's approach to mortality as comedy. Tricia Takanawa's reporting segments are all written by the same staff writer who used to work in local television news. All of her ridiculous news stories are based on real absurd stories that the writer covered during his journalism career, just exaggerated for comedic effect. The Drunken Clam Bar where Peter and his friends hang out was modeled after Cheers, but the writers deliberately made it seedier and more depressing to contrast with that show's warm, welcoming atmosphere. It's meant to represent the difference between idealized television friendships and actual dysfunctional male bonding. Here's a weird production detail. The show's writers keep a cutaway database with hundreds of unused cutaway gags organized by setup line. If they need a quick cutaway for an episode that's running short, they can search the database by keyword and find something appropriate. Some of these unused cutaways eventually become the basis for entire episodes. The reason Herbert, the elderly neighbor, is so creepy isn't just for shock value, is inexamined. His character is actually a commentary on how society often ignores obvious warning signs about predatory behavior. The writers intentionally make him so obviously suspicious that it becomes absurd that no one in the show takes him seriously. Stewie's football-shaped head wasn't originally intentional. Seth MacFarlane was just a poor artist when he created the character, but the distinctive shape became so iconic that when the animation quality improved, they kept the weird proportions on purpose. The show's musical numbers aren't just random, they're specifically written to parody different Broadway and Hollywood musical styles. Each song is crafted to sound like it could come from a specific era of musical theater, from 1,930 seconds Hollywood musicals to modern Broadway productions. Here's something about the voice acting. When characters sing, their speaking voice actors don't always do the singing. Several characters have dedicated singing voices who are professional Broadway performers. This is why some characters sound noticeably different when they break into song. The chicken that fights Peter is named Ernie, and he has his own detailed backstory that's never fully explained in the show. According to the writers, Ernie has a family, a mortgage, and a completely normal life outside of his inexplicable rivalry with Peter. His motivations remain mysterious intentionally. Roadhouse is referenced more than any other single movie in Family Guy, appearing in over 30 different episodes in various forms. The writers have said this started as an inside joke because they couldn't believe how seriously the movie takes itself, but it evolved into genuine affection for the film's absurdity. The Conway Twitty segments were actually Seth MacFarlane's way of paying tribute to his grandfather, who was a huge country music fan. MacFarlane has said these moments are among his favorites in the entire series because they remind him of watching old variety shows with his grandfather. Meg's unpopularity isn't just a running gag. It's a deliberate commentary on how middle children often get overlooked in family dynamics. The writers have given her hidden depths that occasionally surface, suggesting she's actually the most emotionally intelligent member of the family despite being constantly ignored. The show's animation style deliberately mimics the look of 1,980 Saturday morning cartoons, complete with slightly off-model character designs and limited animation techniques. This was intentional, as MacFarlane wanted the show to feel nostalgic and slightly cheap, like the cartoons he grew up watching. Here's a detail about the opening theme. The lyrics were written to sound like a generic sitcom theme song, but they're actually describing a completely dysfunctional family situation. The cheerful melody masks the fact that the words are talking about how nothing in this family works properly. The reason Family Guy episodes often feel like collections of unrelated sketches is because that's exactly what they are. The writers start with a basic premise and then build around it with whatever random ideas they've been wanting to explore. This approach gives the show its unique, chaotic energy. So there you have it. Dozens of random Family Guy facts to occupy your mind as you drift off to sleep. From production secrets to hidden meanings, the world of Family Guy is far more complex and deliberate than it might appear on the surface. Whether you're a longtime fan or just discovering the show, these little details add extra layers to every rewatch. Sweet dreams. And remember, somewhere in Quahog, Peter Griffin is probably doing something spectacularly stupid, while Stewie plots world domination, and Brian writes terrible novels. The chaos never stops in the Griffin household, and honestly, we wouldn't want it any other way. Hey there, Night Owls and Family Guy fanatics. If you're settling in for some sleep but your brain is still buzzing, you've clicked on the perfect video. Tonight we're diving deep into the wonderfully weird world of Quahog, with some absolutely wild Family Guy facts that'll either lull you to sleep or keep you awake, pondering the bizarre genius of Seth MacFarlane's creation. Picture this scenario. You're lying in bed, eyes getting heavy, but your mind keeps wandering. Maybe you're thinking about that awkward conversation you had at work, or wondering why you ate that entire bag of chips for dinner. Well, forget all that mundane stuff because we're about to embark on a journey through 20 years of Family Guy madness that's guaranteed to give your brain something much more entertaining to chew on. Let's start with something that might surprise you about the show's origins. When Seth MacFarlane first pitched Family Guy, he was just 24 years old and working at Hanna-Barbera. The network executives were so impressed with his 15-minute pilot that they ordered the series on the spot. But here's the kicker. MacFarlane had never actually run a television show before. He was essentially handed the keys to a multi-million-dollar production with zero experience as a showrunner. Talk about fake it till you make it. Speaking of MacFarlane, did you know he was supposed to be on one of the planes that hit the World Trade Center on September 11th? He had a ticket for American Airlines Flight 11, but overslept after a night of drinking and missed the flight by just 10 minutes. When he arrived at the airport and learned what had happened, he realized how close he'd come to never creating the Griffin family we know and love today. It's one of those sliding door moments that makes you think about how different pop culture would be if he'd caught that flight. Now let's talk about Brian Griffin, the family's intellectual dog who walks on two legs and drives a Prius. Brian's character was actually inspired by MacFarlane's own dog, also named Brian, who passed away in the early 2000s. The real Brian was a white Labrador retriever, and MacFarlane has said that losing him was one of the most difficult experiences of his life. When the show temporarily killed off cartoon Brian in 2013, The fan backlash was so intense that MacFarlane received death threats. People were legitimately angry about a fictional dog's death, which says something about how attached viewers had become to these animated characters. The temporary death of Brian actually serves as a perfect example of how deeply fans connect with Family Guy's characters, even though they're supposed to be parodies and caricatures. When Brian was hit by a car and replaced by a new dog named Vinny, voiced by Tony Sirico from The Sopranos, social media exploded with outrage. There were online petitions, angry tweets, and even real-world protests. The writers had planned to bring Brian back all along. It was meant to be a multi-episode arc exploring how the family would cope with loss, but the reaction was so overwhelmingly negative that they cut the storyline short and resurrected Brian after just 2 episodes. Here's something that might blow your mind about the show's production process. Each episode of Family Guy takes approximately 10 months to create, from start to finish. That means when you're watching a new episode that just aired, the writers were working on the initial script almost a year ago. This long production timeline sometimes creates weird situations where the show references current events that are no longer current by the time the episode airs, or misses major cultural moments entirely because they couldn't pivot quickly enough. The cutaway gags that Family Guy is famous for were actually born out of necessity rather than creative choice. In the early seasons, episodes would often run short, and the writers needed quick ways to fill time. These random flashbacks and non-sequitur scenes were easy to animate and didn't require complex storytelling or character development. What started as a time-filling technique became the show's signature storytelling device, copied by countless other animated series. Let's dive into some character-specific weirdness. Stewie Griffin's distinctive football-shaped head wasn't originally intended to be football-shaped at all. MacFarlane has said that Stewie's head design was meant to evoke a more oval, egg-like shape that would make him look unnatural and slightly alien. The football comparison only came up after the character was already established, and now it's impossible to unsee. Stewie's sexuality has been a topic of debate among fans for years, but MacFarlane has given conflicting answers about whether the baby is gay, straight, or something else entirely. In some interviews, he suggested that Stewie is gay, while in others, he said the character is too young for sexual orientation to be relevant. The ambiguity seems to be intentional, allowing viewers to interpret the character however they want while keeping the writers free to take Stewie in any direction the story demands. Peter Griffin's voice is actually just Seth MacFarlane doing an impression of a security guard he knew growing up in Connecticut. The guard worked at the animation studio where MacFarlane interned during college, and he would do this exaggerated New England accent that MacFarlane found hilarious. Years later, when he needed a voice for Peter, he remembered that security guard and based the entire character's speech pattern on him. The show's relationship with censorship has always been complicated and fascinating. While Family Guy pushes boundaries constantly, there are still certain words and topics that are completely off-limits for broadcast television. The writers have developed an entire arsenal of creative workarounds, using sound effects, cutaways, and strategic editing to suggest things they can't show explicitly. Sometimes the censored version is actually funnier than what they originally wrote because the restrictions force them to be more creative. Cleveland Brown's spin-off series, The Cleveland Show, was actually planned before Family Guy was even renewed for its 4th season. MacFarlane and the writers knew they wanted to explore Cleveland's character more deeply, but they weren't sure Family Guy would survive long enough to make it happen. When the show came back from cancellation stronger than ever, they were able to move forward with Cleveland's solo series, though it only lasted 4 seasons before Cleveland returned to Quahog. The character of Meg Griffin has gone through more voice actress changes than any other main character on the show. Lacey Chabert voiced Meg for the 1st season and part of the 2nd, but left due to scheduling conflicts with her film career. Mila Kunis took over the role and has been playing Meg ever since, but many fans still don't realize there was ever a different voice actress. Interestingly, Kunis was only 15 when she started voicing Meg, making her younger than the character she was playing. Family Guy's cancellation and resurrection story is one of the most unusual in television history. The show was canceled after just 3 seasons due to low ratings, but DVD sales and syndication reruns on Adult Swim introduced it to a whole new audience. The ratings for the reruns were actually higher than the ratings for new episodes had been when the show first aired. This success convinced Fox to bring the show back. making Family Guy the first canceled series to be revived purely based on DVD sales and cable reruns. The show's animation style has evolved significantly over the years, though casual viewers might not notice the changes. Early episodes were animated using traditional cell animation techniques, while current episodes are created entirely using digital animation software. The digital process allows for more complex visual effects and faster production times, but some longtime fans argue that the hand-drawn episodes had a warmer, more organic feel. Here's something that might surprise you about the show's writing process. Despite Family Guy's reputation for random stream-of-consciousness humor, every single cutaway gag and non-sequitur moment is carefully planned and scripted. The writers spend weeks crafting these seemingly spontaneous moments, testing them with focus groups and refining them until they hit just the right note of absurdity. What feels effortlessly random is actually the result of meticulous preparation and timing. The character of Quagmire was originally going to be named Quahog, after the town where the Griffins live. But the writers realized that having a character and a location with the same name would be confusing for viewers, so they changed it to Quagmire at the last minute. The name Quagmire is actually a play on words, combining the idea of being stuck in a difficult situation with the character's, shall we say, adventurous romantic life. Death, the Grim Reaper character who occasionally appears on the show, was voiced by Norm Macdonald in his early appearances. Macdonald's deadpan delivery was perfect for the role, but scheduling conflicts meant he couldn't continue voicing the character regularly. Adam Carolla took over the role for several episodes before it eventually went to other voice actors. Death's inconsistent voice casting reflects one of the challenges of using celebrity guest stars for recurring characters. The show has featured some truly bizarre celebrity cameos over the years, but one of the strangest was Rush Limbaugh playing himself in an episode where Brian becomes conservative. Limbaugh recorded his lines during a commercial break of his radio show, and the writers had to work around his limited availability by keeping his dialogue minimal and straightforward. The episode aired during the height of Limbaugh's popularity, and his appearance generated significant media attention. Family Guy's approach to continuity is deliberately inconsistent, which allows the writers tremendous creative freedom, but sometimes confuses viewers who are paying close attention. Characters die and come back to life. Major events happen and are never mentioned again. And the timeline of the show makes absolutely no sense if you try to analyze it logically. This isn't accidental. The writers have explicitly said they prioritize individual episode quality over long-term story coherence. The show's merchandising success has been almost as impressive as its television ratings. Family Guy merchandise has generated hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue, with everything from t-shirts and coffee mugs to video games and board games. The talking plush toys of Stewie and Brian were particularly popular, though they had to be carefully programmed to avoid saying anything too inappropriate for younger children who might play with them. One of the most interesting aspects of Family Guy's production is how they handle controversial episodes. The writers have an informal rating system for how potentially offensive each episode might be, and they adjust the marketing and promotion accordingly. Episodes that push boundaries harder than usual often air with less advanced publicity, allowing them to reach audiences without generating pre-broadcast controversy that might lead to censorship. The show's relationship with Fox Network executives has been notoriously rocky over the years. MacFarlane has been vocal about his frustrations with network interference, and several episodes have included not-so-subtle jabs at Fox's programming decisions and corporate culture. Despite this tension, Family Guy remains one of Fox's most valuable properties, giving MacFarlane significant leverage in creative disputes. Here's a production detail that most viewers never think about, but affects every single episode. The timing of animated comedy is completely different from live-action comedy because animated characters can move and react in ways that real actors cannot. Jokes that would fall flat in live action can work perfectly in animation because the visual possibilities are unlimited. The writers and animators work closely together to ensure that the timing of visual gags matches the rhythm of the dialogue. The voice recording process for Family Guy is also unique in the animation world. Most animated shows record each actor separately, but Family Guy often brings the main cast together for group recording sessions. This allows for more natural interactions and improvisation, though it also makes the recording process more expensive and time-consuming. Seth MacFarlane voices multiple characters, So he sometimes has to have conversations with himself, switching between Peter, Brian, and Stewie within the same scene. As you're drifting off to sleep tonight, think about this final fact. Family Guy has now been on the air for over 2 decades, making it one of the longest-running animated series in television history. Kids who watched the first episode when it premiered in 1999 are now adults with children of their own. The show has outlasted multiple generations of network executives, survived cancellation, and adapted to completely different media landscapes, from broadcast television to streaming services. The Griffin family has become as familiar to many people as their own relatives, which is both impressive and slightly disturbing when you consider how dysfunctional that family actually is. But maybe that's the secret to Family Guy's enduring appeal. In a world where real families can be just as complicated and bizarre as the fictional ones we see on television, there's something comforting about knowing that no matter how weird your own family dynamics might be, at least you're not dealing with a talking baby who's constantly plotting world domination, and a dog who's writing the great American novel. Sweet dreams, and remember, life's a lot like Family Guy. Sometimes it makes perfect sense. Sometimes it's completely random, and sometimes you just have to go with it and hope for the best. Whether you're a longtime fan or a newcomer to the show, these facts give you a glimpse into the creative chaos that makes Family Guy such a unique entry in television history. Sleep well, and maybe you'll dream about Quahog tonight. Hey there, night owls and Family Guy fanatics! If you're settling in for some bedtime content about everyone's favorite dysfunctional animated family, you've come to the right place. Tonight we're diving deep into the Griffin household with some fascinating facts that'll either help you drift off peacefully or keep you up thinking about just how wild this show really gets. Now, before we jump into our relaxing journey through Quahog, let me ask you something. Have you ever really stopped to think about how Family Guy has been part of our lives for over 2 decades? Since 1999, this show has given us countless laughs, memorable cutaway gags, and characters that have become household names. But tonight, we're going beyond the surface-level humor to explore some truly mind-blowing details you probably never knew. Here's something that might surprise you right off the bat. Family Guy was actually canceled not once, but twice by Fox. The first cancellation happened in 2002 after just 3 seasons. The network executives thought the show wasn't finding its audience. But here's where it gets interesting. Adult Swim picked up the reruns, and the show exploded in popularity. The DVD sales went through the roof, and suddenly Fox realized they had made a massive mistake. They brought it back in 2005, and it's been running ever since. Sometimes, the best things in life really do come back when you least expect them. Let's talk about the voice behind Stewie Griffin for a moment. Seth MacFarlane, the show's creator, originally based Stewie's voice on a combination of Rex Harrison from My Fair Lady and a generic posh English accent. But here's the fascinating part. MacFarlane has mentioned in interviews that Stewie's sexuality has always been deliberately ambiguous. The character exists in this interesting space where his romantic interests shift depending on what serves the story best. It's actually a clever writing technique that keeps the character unpredictable and allows for more diverse storylines. Speaking of voices, did you know that Seth MacFarlane voices not just Stewie, but also Peter Griffin, Brian Griffin, Glenn Quagmire, Tom Tucker, and Carter Pewterschmidt? That's 6 major characters, all coming from one incredibly talented vocal performer. When you think about it, MacFarlane is essentially having conversations with himself in most scenes. The man has to switch between these distinct personalities, sometimes within the same sentence. It's like being a one-person theater troupe. Here's a production fact that'll blow your mind. Each episode of Family Guy takes approximately 10 months to complete, from initial concept to final product. The animation process alone requires hundreds of individual artists working on different aspects. Every single movement, facial expression, and background detail has to be hand-drawn and then digitally colored. When you consider that the show produces over 20 episodes per season, you start to realize the incredible amount of work that goes into bringing the Griffin family to life. The show's famous cutaway gags weren't actually planned from the beginning. They evolved naturally as the writers found themselves wanting to include jokes that didn't fit into the main storyline. These random flashbacks and fantasy sequences became such a signature element that other animated shows have tried to copy the format, but none have quite captured the same spontaneous energy that Family Guy brings to these moments. Now, let's explore some character development that might help you see the show in a new light. Brian Griffin, the family dog, was originally going to be much more of a background character. MacFarlane has said that Brian evolved into the show's voice of reason almost by accident. The writers kept finding themselves using Brian as a way to comment on Peter's more outrageous behavior, and gradually he became this intellectual counterpoint to the family's chaos. It's interesting how a character can grow beyond their original intended purpose. Here's something about the show's cultural impact that's worth pondering as you drift off tonight. Family Guy has been translated into dozens of languages and broadcasts in over 100 countries worldwide. But the cultural references and American humor don't always translate perfectly. International versions sometimes have to completely rewrite jokes or replace cultural references with local equivalents. Imagine trying to explain a 1,980 seconds American pop culture reference to someone in rural Japan. The localization teams for this show deserve serious recognition. The relationship dynamics within the Griffin family actually reflect a lot of real family psychology, despite all the absurd situations they find themselves in. Take the sibling rivalry between Chris and Meg, for example. While it's exaggerated for comedic effect, it captures something genuine about how teenagers navigate their place within family hierarchies. Even the marriage between Lois and Peter, with all its dysfunction, touches on real issues that many couples face, just amplified to ridiculous proportions. One aspect of the show that's evolved significantly over the years is its approach to social commentary. Early seasons focused more on pure absurdist humor, but as the series progressed, it began tackling more complex social and political issues. The writers found ways to embed serious conversations about topics like religion, politics, and social justice within the framework of outrageous comedy. It's like sneaking vegetables into a kid's favorite dessert. The animation style of Family Guy has also undergone subtle but significant changes over the decades. If you compare early episodes to recent ones, you'll notice the color palette has become richer, the character movements more fluid, and the background details more elaborate. Technology has allowed the animators to add layers of visual storytelling that weren't possible in the better show's early days. Yet they've managed to maintain the core visual identity that makes Family Guy instantly recognizable. Let's talk about the show's relationship with music for a moment. Family Guy has featured hundreds of musical numbers over the years, from elaborate production numbers to simple character songs. Seth MacFarlane's background in musical theater heavily influences these sequences. Many of the songs are surprisingly well crafted from a musical standpoint, with proper verse-chorus structures and sophisticated orchestrations. Some episodes are essentially animated musicals disguised as sitcom episodes. Here's a fascinating detail about the show's writing process. The writer's room operates on a principle they call yes and, borrowed from improvisational comedy. When someone pitches an idea, no matter how outrageous, the group tries to build on it rather than shut it down immediately. This approach has led to some of the show's most memorable and bizarre moments. It's a reminder that creativity often flourishes when we suspend our initial judgment and let ideas develop naturally. The character of Meg Griffin represents something unique in television comedy. She's simultaneously the most normal member of her family and the one who receives the most abuse from everyone around her. This creates an interesting dynamic where the audience often sympathizes with her while still laughing at her misfortunes. It's a delicate balance that the writers have maintained for over 20 years, and it speaks to something deeper about how we treat people who don't fit into expected social roles. Cleveland Brown's departure to his own spin-off show and eventual return to Family Guy created some interesting continuity challenges for the writers. They had to explain his absence and return in ways that felt natural to the ongoing story, while also acknowledging the real-world production reasons behind these changes. It's a perfect example of how television shows must constantly adapt to behind-the-scenes realities while maintaining narrative consistency. The show's approach to time and continuity is intentionally flexible. Characters age slowly or not at all, major events from one episode might never be mentioned again, and the family's financial situation fluctuates wildly depending on story needs. This loose approach to continuity allows for maximum creative freedom, but also creates opportunities for dedicated fans to spot inconsistencies and create theories about the show's internal logic. Family Guy's influence on internet culture cannot be overstated. Countless memes, viral videos, and social media trends have originated from or been inspired by the show. The phrase, "Oh no, he didn't," might never have become a cultural touchstone without Peter Griffin's dramatic delivery. The show's rapid-fire humor style has influenced how people create and consume comedy content online. The voice acting in Family Guy extends far beyond the main cast. Over the years, the show has featured hundreds of celebrity guest voices, from major Hollywood stars to political figures to fellow comedians. Some guests play themselves, others take on original characters, and a few have become recurring voices in the Family Guy universe. The casting directors have an impressive ability to match celebrity voices with characters that enhance rather than distract from the story. Here's something that might help you appreciate the show's craft as you wind down for the night. The timing of Family Guy's comedy is incredibly precise. Voice actors don't just deliver lines. They perform them with specific rhythms and pauses that maximize comedic impact. The editors then fine-tune these performances, sometimes adjusting timing by fractions of seconds to hit the perfect comedic beat. It's a level of precision that most viewers never consciously notice but definitely feel. The show's relationship with censorship has evolved significantly since its early days. Standards and practices for television have changed, allowing Family Guy to push boundaries that would have been impossible in its first seasons. At the same time, the writers have developed more sophisticated ways to be provocative without simply relying on shock value. It's an interesting case study in how creative people adapt to changing cultural standards while maintaining their artistic voice. As we near the end of our journey through these Family Guy facts, consider how the show has managed to remain relevant across multiple generations of viewers. People who watched the show as teenagers in the early 2000s are now watching it with their own children. The humor that resonates with different age groups varies, but there's something universal about the Griffin family's chaotic energy that transcends generational boundaries. The production team behind Family Guy has created what amounts to a small animation empire. The success of the main show led to spin-offs, specials, video games, merchandise, and even live concert tours featuring the show's music. From a business perspective, Family Guy demonstrates how a creative property can expand far beyond its original medium while maintaining its core identity. Finally, as you settle in for sleep tonight, remember that Family Guy represents something special in the landscape of American entertainment. It's a show that dares to be completely ridiculous while occasionally touching on profound truths about family, society, and human nature. Whether you're a longtime fan or someone who just discovered the show, there's something comforting about knowing that somewhere in the fictional town of Quahog, the Griffin family is probably getting into some new absurd adventure. The next time you watch Family Guy, you might find yourself noticing details you never saw before, appreciating the craft behind the chaos, or simply enjoying the comfort of familiar characters doing wonderfully unpredictable things. Sometimes the best. Entertainment doesn't try to change your life. It just makes the everyday world a little more interesting and a lot more fun. Sweet dreams, and remember, tomorrow's another day in Quahog, and there's always another ridiculous adventure waiting just around the corner. Whether you're Team Peter, Team Brian, or even Team Meg, the Griffin family will be there whenever you need a laugh or just want to escape into a world where anything can happen, and usually does.